Chapter 584. Li Yunxin's body suddenly froze. The snow stirred up by his palm wind was still falling from the sky, and the trees that had been blown down were rolling down the mountain. The people in the village not far away seemed to be awakened by the noise, and 2 or 3 households lit up their lights. It seemed that as soon as Li Chunfeng left, his terrifying anger had vanished without a trace. He was like a deflated balloon or like a condensed stream of iron. He stood alone in the snow and everything just now seemed like a dream. In his previous life he had seen some children. When they were angry at adults they were like little volcanoes. But if that lord left and disappeared, their anger would quickly subside. It was as if they knew that even if they made a fuss now they wouldn't get anything. Maybe it was because they were only willing to vent their anger on the people closest to them. He didn't know if he was like that now. However, the anger at the bottom of his heart quickly subsided, as if it was a storm that came and went as quickly as it came. What was left was an indescribable feeling. In fact, even he didn't know how much of his anger was real, and how much was an act he couldn't control. But of course he could understand. Whether in his previous life or this life, he understood that many emotions in the world couldn't stand the test of time. For the sake of fame, for the sake of benefits, for the sake of any reason, many people were willing to exchange something as overflowing as feelings. Because he was such a person in his previous life. In his previous life, he wasn't the producer of emotions but he was definitely the most skilled user. He realized this when he looked into the darkness from the foot of the Free Cloud Mountain, and saw a familiar figure. But he knew that Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu actually had a reason to do certain things. They wanted to have a child to use. No matter who ran into the child they would be used. He ran into the child himself, so who could be blamed? Then things developed step by step and the various events in the past made him develop certain emotions. It was something that he was willing to do. To do great things. To use nothing. But he was stupid enough to shed a tear because of this emotion. But when he faced Li Chunfeng, when the anger rose in his heart, he realized that he might not be able to hide or suppress this emotion. Since he couldn't suppress it, he did it the way he always did. He magnified the joy by 90%. The slightest bit of anger would cause his anger to soar to the heavens. In this way, others could not figure out his feelings, and it could also be considered as putting on a good show. Perhaps he was living a free and unrestrained life, or perhaps he was hiding in the solid 7-layered fortress. He didn't care about that, but only this time when he allowed his anger to grow unscrupulously, he felt a frightening comfort. He felt comfortable because of this anger, because he could unleash this anger on Li Chunfeng. He knew that this feeling of release had another well-known name. He felt wronged. But if he didn't mind it and had already gotten over it, why should he feel aggrieved? After standing in the snow for a full quarter of an hour, Li Yunxin gritted his teeth and spun around shouting, "Old Lu!" Lu Gongzan dashed out of the forest. He shook his head and said, "That won't do. There's nothing left." Before Li Yunxin showed up, he gave Lu Gongzan a magical treasure. He wanted to let Li Chunfeng go so that he could track his whereabouts and find out something. But before, he only thought that Li Chunfeng's cultivation base was roughly in the True Realm. He didn't expect that he was in the Profound Realm. The True Realm and the Profound Realm couldn't be mentioned in the same breath, so the magical treasure in Lu Gongzan's hand didn't find anything. This was all within Li Yunxin's expectations. He slammed his palm on the ground. "Hey!" This was a sound of both anger and helplessness. A large area of the ground, the place where he, Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu had once lived, was smashed into layers of mud with a loud boom, completely destroying the remaining bricks and tiles underneath. Lu Gongzan only sighed softly and still didn't say anything. By this time, all the houses in the village at the foot of the mountain had turned on their lights. They vaguely saw people looking in their direction, but they couldn't see clearly. Li Yunxin also turned his head to look at them for a while, then suddenly jumped up and disappeared into the boundless forest with a gust of evil wind. Lu Gongzan hesitated for a moment, then followed him. About a quarter of an hour later, Lao Dao saw him again. Li Yunxin sat alone on a big snow-covered rock, surrounded by trees with twisted branches. He rose from the snowy ground into the night sky, like a huge, ferocious cage. He sat alone in this cage in his cloak. He was also a ball of white. When Lu Gongzan walked to the edge of the rock, Li Yunxin sighed. "I didn't expect that." Lao Dao stood beside the rock and thought for a moment. "When did you know?" "Maybe long ago." Wei River Dragon King was silent for a while. His eyes were like that of a mortal looking at the snow. But in fact he couldn't see anything except the snow. "Now that I think about it, I used to think that they taught me slowly because they weren't sure if they wanted me to get involved in the disputes of the cultivation world. But now looking back, it turns out that they weren't sure if I was that person. In the past, I should have known that the two of them were in the true state. They hid for so long. How could they be killed so quickly? But I still told myself that it was like that. Maybe it's because in my heart. Lu Gongzan interrupted him. His tone was gentle but also very serious. Didn't we talk about this before? There's something in your heart. Others don't know but I do. Li Yunxin raised his head and looked at him. What's in my heart? Lao Dao met his gaze. Brother Xian told me about the study of the heart. I also learned a lot. But there's one thing called a doctor, not a doctor. You should understand. When he said this, Li Yunxin straightened his body and raised his hand. Don't. Lao Dao shook his head. I won't. I just want to talk like before. Li Yunxin's body withered again. Then continue. You should understand that there are some things that you might have done to yourself, but you still don't know, Lao Dao continued. For example, you said that you had no feelings or desires in your previous life, but you really wanted to experience it. In the end, maybe you experienced it, but that feeling also brought you more regret. So you took revenge for 10 years. If a certain kind of feeling first gave you a moment of happiness, then gave you 10 years of pain, you should be afraid. Li Yunxin stared at the snow for a while and softly said to himself, You mean, I was adopted. I was adopted and I slowly learned what it means to. He paused and skipped that word. But as soon as I experienced it, he died. Therefore it brought me hatred and great pain. And then in this life, Lu Gongzan said in a low voice, you are afraid of that kind of feeling like a tiger. But in your heart you want it. So you build up a mental defense for yourself, and at the same time, you want to break your mental defense. You said that you used to have the state of mind of Taishang Wang Qin. Is it really Taishang Wang Qin? Or, are you like those Daotong and Kenzo cultivators all pretending to be emotionless? However, these may not be what you did consciously. Your subconscious mind finished it. It wants to protect you. But you yourself don't want this kind of protection. So, Brother Xan should be very sad. Li Yunxin didn't say anything. Lao Dao shook his head. So there's nothing to be afraid of. You are a person who understands love and hate. In this life, you feel that you have someone who loves you, so you experience it. But in the end, you find that everything is not the case. Everyone will be sad because of this. There's nothing to be afraid of. Li Yunxin frowned and gritted his teeth. But he lied to me, not necessarily. Lao Dao sighed in a low voice. Which parent in the world doesn't love their child? Brother Xan, it's true that they want to use you, but their feelings for each other may not be fake. They have been together for more than 10 years, and they gave birth to each other. Even cats and dogs have feelings, let alone humans. Li Yunxin snorted. Do you believe these words? Lu Gongzan looked at him. Since you left the mountain until tonight, you have been under the control of Moon Enju. Then you have turned misfortune into blessing several times and escaped death by the skin of your teeth. Don't tell me he had nothing to do with it? Perhaps that Li Chunfeng has done many things for you. Li Yunxin slowly straightened his body and frowned. You speak up for him. Do you want me to be deeply grateful to him? Lao Dao didn't say anything and only looked at him. After looking at him for 3 or 4 seconds, Li Yunxin's body finally relaxed. Alas. He sighed. All right. So, Brother Xan, you know all this. There are few people smarter than you in this world. You just need some time to think about it. Lu Gongzan said this and paused for a moment. Then he said, I also need some time to think about it. The last sentence made Li Yunxin frown. What? What do you want to think about? The old Taoist priest lowered his gaze and smiled. I still have debts to settle. Debts? I owe someone a debt. He sighed. I owe someone 2 lives. 3. That day on Mount June I told those people that Shuk and Siki were at White Dragon Mouth. Sanhua and Jessen were also there. You did it to save me. Li Yunxin said seriously. But it was also what I said. Lao Dao also looked at Li Yunxin seriously. I did it to save you. But it also hurt them. If I don't have any guilt in my heart, how am I different from a beast? Li Yunxin was silent for a moment. Do you think I'm a beast? You also have guilt, the old Taoist said. It's just that your guilt towards them has been transferred to me. Otherwise, why did you come to me in Shanji when you entered Cloud Mountain that day? At that time, demons and cultivators of Shenmen were outside. If any of them found you, you would really die. But you spent a lot of effort to come to the dungeon. Is this your style of doing things? Li Yunxin frowned and waved his hand. What's the use of saying this? it will become my inner demon. Lu Gongzan sighed again. Brother Xian. I used to be a dissolute painter. Maybe I will be poor for another 10 or 20 years, and that will be the end of my life. But you told me to have other choices. You told me to cultivate, achieve the Tao and be reborn. But you and I both know that the cultivation method of those Taoists and swordsmen of Xianmen is evil. Cultivators can't be as heartless as them. Otherwise, what's the purpose of cultivation and longevity? Even if it's not for humanity or the common people, it should be for oneself. But if it's for oneself, when you cultivate you will have no desire. So these days I've been thinking, what should I be like? Lu Gongzan put his hands behind his back and paced slowly on the snow. I'm cultivating now, but how should I cultivate? Xianmen is an evil path. I can't go like that. Cultivators should be. They know more about love, sorrow, and suffering than mortals. They should be compassionate and observe everything as if they were observing their own bodies. But it's because they understand that they can accept it. Because they understand without fear they can let it go. Speaking of this, he raised his head and looked up at the night sky for a long time. So I can't let go of those IO. Xianmen regard this as a taboo. But I think this is the first step of cultivation. Li Yunxin was silent. When the night wind in the forest blew the snow on the tree to his head again, he said faintly, "What are you going to do?" I remember which schools raided Dongting that day. I also remember who is still alive. On Mount Yunshan that day there should be one, the head of Danding School of Shangqing. Gui Yuanzi. Li Yunxin said. Exactly. Lu Gongzan nodded. This person is also one of the murderers. I have to kill him. Li Yunxin fell into a long silence. On Mount Yunshan that day, Sanhua took him to Mount Shaoyun and he passed by the gate of Danding School of Shangqing. However, he had more important things to do at that time, so he planned to get even with Gui Yuanzi later. But things always changed. In the end he ran out of Mount Yunshan. It was a mess inside, so he didn't want to get even with Gui Yuanzi. In fact, this kind of thing should be understood by those who do great things. At that time, there were many more important things to deal with and many more important people to think about. There was no way to waste time for Gui Yuanzi. The general trend of the world was important. Once the great thing was done, Gui Yuanzi couldn't run away. Many people who were sacrificed would also be given an explanation. He thought so in his heart, so he did it. But at this time he realized that the Lu Gongzan beside him was a living and independent person. Even if he was a follower, he would have his own ideas. And in his heart, Lu Gongzan was far more than that. For a long time, Li Yunxin was used to making some decisions by himself, and Lu Gongzan only needed to execute and assist. Most of the decisions he made were correct. Both he and Lao Dao benefited a lot from it. Gradually, the face of this Lao Dao who led him into the city of Wei became a little blurred. When Li Yunxin did something he would always follow him. This made him feel that it was a natural thing to do. Some private things that he was worried about could be handed over to him. For him, he was a very complicated existence. But at this moment tonight, Li Yunxin realized that this existence was like himself, with an independent and complicated spiritual world. For example, his debt. After a while, Li Yunxin said, Gui Yuanzi is in the real state. If he is still alive, you will die if you seek revenge on him. Lu Gongzan smiled, this is my debt. If I really die, I will pay off the debt. There was a moment of silence. Li Yunxin said again, there are other debts. And her debts. Lu Gongzan said, although her corpse is gone, her relatives are still there. If I kill Gui Yuanzi and don't die, I will do something for them. Li Yunxin didn't say anything. After a while, he suddenly frowned and looked at him angrily. I saved you from the swordsman in the caravan of Hongfu escort agency. I also taught you how to cultivate. You owe me the most. Then what about your debt to me? Lao Dao smiled, I'm afraid it will be hard for me to pay off your debt. But allow me to pay these first, and then slowly pay you back. Slowly pay how? Li Yunxin said to himself nervously, okay, slowly pay. First, Li Chunfeng and Shang Wanyu died. Tonight they found them and left. Now you are going to leave, slowly pay me back. What do you have to pay me back? Pay me back with your life. After saying this, he suddenly stood up from the stone and his expression became very scary. Pay me back with your life now. Lu Gongzan was stunned. But then he thought of something, frowned and shouted, Brother X, and no. That thing is extremely precious. But Li Yunxin had already pointed her finger at him. I want it. He was now in the profound realm. Everything that Lu Gongzan cultivated was imparted to him by him. Therefore, with just this finger, Lao Dao's body was frozen. Even his expression froze on his face. Li Yunxin jumped off the big stone he was sitting on and waved his hand at the stone. The huge stone was instantly cut in half. The cut surface was as smooth as a mirror. Then Li Yunxin used his finger as a knife and used his demonic qi to carve on the stone. The first time he did this was in the city of Wei. He used the yang qi of the 300,000 people in the city of Wei to draw another him to ensure that his soul didn't lose its mind. He was in the void realm then, and now he was in the profound realm. When he did the same thing, how could the word familiar be used to describe it? It only took him a quarter of an hour. That Lu Gongzan was drawn on the stone. Then he stared at the frozen Lu Gongzan for a while and then said, "Okay. If you want to repay your debt, I will help you. But if you want to repay your debt like this, go and die. Is it because you feel that you owe too many people, and now that you helped me get out of danger, you feel that you can die and live comfortably? Hey, there is no such thing as leaving after owing someone something in this world. It's okay if you can't pay it back now. Remember to pay it back slowly. Now I will let you pay me back slowly." After saying this, his wrist shook in the void. With a swoosh, he opened the fan in his hand. This folding fan hid the tens of thousands of souls that he collected on the battlefield. Now he used his supernatural power and shook it on the green stone. The majestic demonic qi poured into the painting on the green stone. Almost half of it was used. Then with a swoosh, Li Yunxin closed the fan. He stared at Lu Gongzan for a while. He flipped out a sharp scale from his palm and smashed him into pieces of flesh and blood with a single palm strike. Chapter 585. Since Lu Gongzan's body was destroyed, only a remnant soul was left standing in the same place. Like all ghosts that were born after death, they were at a loss for a moment, not knowing what was going on. But Li Yunxin didn't hesitate. He clenched his fist, and this remnant soul was also destroyed. Everything happened in an instant. At this time, the forest returned to peace. But soon, the surface of the green stone lit up. A misty golden light emerged from the portrait of Lu Gongzan. Countless strands of golden light intertwined and wandered, slowly forming the acupoints, meridians, snow mountain and ocean of qi. The old soul had been destroyed. But a new soul stood up from the green stone. The soul, painted by the only two Taoist painters of the mysterious realm, perfectly replicated Lu Gongzan's appearance, personality, memory and all the characteristics. This was also what Li Yunxin did to himself in the city of Wei. Compared to the old him, the new him was, in a sense, completely independent but also himself. This new soul of Lu Gongzan blinked and suddenly shivered. Li Yunxin also experienced this feeling. A human soul was hidden in the body, and it was difficult to separate it. After death, the ghost formed was an incomplete soul, and its senses were much slower. Lu Gongzan's current situation could be considered an anomaly. He had an intact divine soul but no physical body to carry it. It was like a baby was suddenly taken out of the mother's body and placed in the cold air. Then he looked around and still couldn't help but say, "Don't," but his voice was like a slight buzz in the air, like the night wind blowing through the forest. Li Yunxin glanced at him and said with his teeth clenched, "Of course I do." Then he hit the broken scale in his hand into Lu Gongzan's soul. An invisible wave swept through Lao Dao's body, and his appearance changed slightly. When Li Yunxin first met Lu Gongzan, Lao Dao was not tall. He was slightly hunched and thin. He was a typical Jianghu man who was down and out. After that, he cultivated the heavenly will technique that he taught him. His hair turned black and his body became sturdy. Moreover, because he had attained the emptiness realm, he had the effect of being reborn, and his stature had also grown. Before tonight, he looked like a dignified middle-aged Taoist priest. But this time it changed again. Its body was once again elongated and it looked younger. He used to look like he was in his 40s or 50s, but now he looked like he was in his early 40s. Her eyes were bright and her face was rosy. If one only looked at his silhouette in the dark night, those in the know might think that he was the former Lord Tongtian Hatred. In fact, the broken scale that Li Yunxin hid into his body was left from when he killed Hatred. When he took over Qi Wen's body in the city of Wei, he possessed that piece of scale. Now he used the same trick on Lu Gongzan. Everything happened very quickly. When Lu Gongzan's body finally took shape and stood on the ground, the flesh and blood that once belonged to his body were still steaming. The newly born Lu Lao Dao immediately shouted, "Why did you use it on me?" At this moment he naturally knew that he used Hatred's emptiness. Li Yunxin had already told him about this after he entered the Cloud Mountain and rescued him. Dragons were different from other humans and demons. They had emptiness. When Qi Wen died, there was an emptiness. From Li Yunxin's point of view, this so-called emptiness was like an official position. When the former Qi Wen died, the position of the 9th Standing Committee member of Dragons became empty. If someone else could fill this emptiness in some way, then he would also occupy this official position. Emptiness was made of iron, but the people on it were like flowing water. When Li Yunxin reconstructed the demon body of the 9th young master in the Cloud Mountain, he did not use emptiness, because emptiness was extremely precious. When one became Dragon Son, he would have the strongest body in the world. He didn't need to cultivate to have a long lifespan. Many people fought for power and profit for nothing more than life. Apart from the few supreme existences in the world, who would be able to resist the temptation of becoming the Dragon's Son, Yizi? But Li Yunxin just stared at him and said nothing. Lu Gongzan finally frowned and beat his chest and stamped his feet. Alas, alas. Alas, it's my fault. He seemed to be very angry and regretful. So he raised his foot and stomped hard on the ground. Immediately, a large clump of snow sprayed in all directions, and the ground where he stood was left a large pit by him. He had never thought that he would have such power and was momentarily stunned. He was stunned for a moment, but then he said, "It's my fault. I shouldn't have said those things at this time. You have this emptiness. You have this emptiness. If you go to Dragon Island, how many things can you do? Why did you give it to me?" Li Yunxin was still silent and pursed his lips. After a while he said, "If you want to repay your debt, go. Don't worry about me." Lu Gongzan sighed again and again. Alas. How can I leave now? I originally thought that Dragon Island is full of danger. If I go with you, I will be a burden. It's better to separate at this time. But now that you gave me this, how can I leave? He shook his head. The annoyance in his heart slowly turned into helplessness. He sighed softly, forget it. I won't leave, I'll go with you to Dragon Island." Hearing him say this, Li Yunxin stared at him for a while. Suddenly, with a twist of his wrist, the folding fan in his hand once again flew towards Lu Gongzan. This move was very fast. Lao Dao couldn't dodge it in time. So he took it all, just like when Li Yunxin first took over the 9th young master's body. When he just became Dragon's Son, his demon power was all gone. He only had the realm. It was like a newly appointed official. He didn't have any trusted aides or his own forces. He had to slowly cultivate and accumulate demon power. Only then would he have great power. In the past, Yazi had been at the 2nd level of the Profound Realm, the Profound Realm. Now that Lao Dao inherited his realm, his demon power was almost gone. When Li Yunxin's fan hit him again, the remaining demon power refined by the dead souls in the fan was all blasted into Lu Gongzan's body. In an instant, the unstoppable power destroyed his strength to the peak of the true realm. He really reached the sky in one step. At this point, he had finally used up all the souls he had collected from the battle between the Taoist and Taoist cultivators. Lu Gongzan felt the changes in his body. The expression on his face became shocked and annoyed again. He frowned and circulated his qi. He seemed to want to force out the demon power in his body. However, he couldn't use this new body as he wished. For a moment, he felt the power in his body was being destroyed by him. He couldn't find a way to vent it. So he raised his eyebrows and got angry at Li Yunxin for the first time. "What are you doing? Why are you throwing a tantrum? Why are you throwing a tantrum like a child?" After saying this, he stomped his feet. "I spent so much effort to get them and now they're all gone." He used to be a bandit, but he was not a vicious thief. He was more like a military counselor. People gave him the nickname Ghost Teller because he didn't show his emotions on his face. Later, he was disheartened by the death of his wife and son. He changed his name and became a street painter. Later, he got the Dragon King Temple in the city of Wei by chance. He could barely make a living, he always looked like a resigned person. Later, he got to know Li Yunxin. He worked harder and never lost his temper. He had lived for 50 or 60 years in the human world and was used to the ways of the world. When he met Li Yunxin again, he felt that he was not an ordinary person and always had something special about him. However, because of his age and Li Yunxin's temperament, he always had some affection for him. Now, because it was a serious matter, he finally got anxious. He raised his eyebrows and his face turned red. Just by looking at their appearance, they looked like a pair of grumpy grandfather and granddaughter or father and son. Li Yunxin was also glaring at him darkly. But when he saw Lu Gongzan like this, he was stunned. It seemed that his anger was stopped and stagnated in his body. After a while, he stepped back and closed his eyes. After a while, he opened his eyes and sighed, Okay. Oh Lu, okay. You can go. He also wanted to ask Lu Gongzan to go. But his tone was calm now, even though he was full of anger before. In the calmness, he seemed to be remorseful and self-blaming like Lu Gongzan. This made old Lu blush and frown. He was also stunned. The two stayed silent in the winter night and in the snow for a while. Old Lu walked 2 steps to Li Yunxin. "Brother XN, what's wrong with you?" Li Yunxin looked at him for a while and shook his head. "You're right. I'm a kid. I'm childish. I have a childish temper." Seeing him like this, Lu Gongzan really felt sorry. He hurriedly said, "Those words don't count." Li Yunxin smiled sadly and raised his hand to interrupt him. "No. You're right. I thought God was dead and I was the son." Lu Gongzan didn't quite understand this sentence. He didn't know if the so-called God was the God of heaven in the folklore. But he could understand what Li Yunxin meant. He was about to speak when he heard Li Yunxin say, "Alas. I told Su Sheng about this before we went to Yinshan. At that time I said that everyone thinks they are the protagonist of this world. Even if they are just an insignificant child beggar, their perception of the world is also presented with themselves as the center. At that time I thought I saw through everything. But today I found that I haven't. Alas. You are all in the background." Li Yunxin shook his head and sighed. He took 2 steps back and sat down on the smooth rock. "You are all in the background. Everyone else is in the background. I think about my own matters, I think about my own thoughts, I think about my worries. Everyone feels that they are the most wronged and have it the hardest. It's hard to consider the feelings of others." Speaking of this, he looked at Lu Gongzan as if he was very emotional. Old Lu, you keep surrounding me. You understand my thoughts and my pain. I'm slowly getting used to it. But in the end you also have your grievances and pain." Lu Gongzan shook his head slightly. "Brother XN, let's not talk about this." "Of course I have to." Li Yunxin lowered his gaze. He paused and said softly, "Yes. I feel wronged and sad. The parents who gave birth to me might be the ones who helped me. They lied to me and said that they were dead so that I would feel sad. Then they went to find someone else. I met all kinds of strong enemies along the way. I was in a dangerous situation. But you must be sad too. Sad that the person closest to me was killed by a friend. It's probably hard for me to understand this feeling even now. With me your life has been turned upside down. But you used to be immortal. You have to adapt to these upheavals. You don't have a golden finger and you don't have any experience from your past life. These things must be very difficult for you." Lu Gongzan sighed repeatedly and waved his hand. "Don't mention it. Sigh, don't mention it." However, Li Yunxin didn't stop. "Some time ago?" "Sure, queasy." Sigh. "Only the two of you know how you and her feel. I'm not a person who understands this kind of feeling. It's even more difficult for me to understand if it doesn't happen to me. Lu. I just met Li Chunfeng and had a talk with him. When I think about how you feel, I don't even dare to imagine how uncomfortable you must be. Back then, when Shirqueezy was seriously injured, I could have saved her." Li Yunxin clenched his fist and lightly hammered the blue stone. "But what did I think? If I want to save her, I should save her as a complete living person. Otherwise I should just wait. Even if she doesn't die, it's still better than becoming a puppet or a ghost cultivator. I've never thought about you. Even if you look at her corpse in the ice coffin every day you'll feel better. I didn't understand back then. After meeting Li Chunfeng I also experienced it. But it's not even 1,000th of what you experienced back then. Old Lu, I've let you down." After hearing Li Yunxin's words, Lu Gongzan finally fell silent. He didn't sigh or speak anymore. After a while he turned around and rolled up his sleeves to wipe his eyes. Li Yunxin smiled again. "I'm a person, without a heart. It doesn't matter if I become a human, a ghost or a demon. But you have a heart. When I became a demon you followed me and killed people. At the bottom of Cloud Mountain, you saw me talking to a group of demons about dividing the world and the catastrophe of the human Tao. I don't have any morals or conscience but you do. In order to save me, those few little demons died. You feel bad about it?" At this point he shook his head. "In my previous life, I gave guidance to some people who had shot and killed people. Those people were still like that under those circumstances. What about you?" Lu Gongzan's back was facing him. He said in a trembling voice, "Brother XN, don't." Li Yunxin nodded. Let's not talk about it." Lu Gongzan stood in the messy snow, while Li Yunxin sat on a blue stone. The two of them stood like this for a while. Then Li Yunxin said faintly, "So, old Lu, I'm serious. Go. Don't mention anything about how precious it is or what not. What you've done for me, You deserve 10 times the compensation. This kind of thing, if I don't give it to someone I trust, who else can I give it to? Lu Gongzan slowly turned around. Brother Exa. I'm afraid I won't be able to rest easy with you like this. Li Yunxin looked at him. What's there to be worried about? I feel like I'm a human now. I feel weak, confused and have a weakness? Lao Dao was silent. Li Yunxin stood up and sighed softly. He heaved a sigh of relief. I've finally thought things through. I can't be a child anymore. Some people, even in death, have never truly matured. I'm probably that kind of person. Li Yunxin smiled, another form of expression. Chapter 586. His smile, it was hard to tell if it was melancholy or sadness. However, it was a complicated meaning that Lu Gongzan could not understand. Thus, he did not know how to comfort Li Yunxin. In the past, whenever Li Yunxin was sad, he could talk to him and tell him to get better quickly. But now, Lao Dao had a lot of troubles and worries in his heart. If it were not for the fact that he could not bear it and had reached the limit of what an ordinary person could bear, he would not have said it tonight. Thus, he was speechless and could only stand opposite Li Yunxin. After a while he said, Brother Xen, then you, I need to think about what I want to do. Li Yunxin sighed in a low voice. He took 2 steps and sat down on the green stone. I probably should not live like this anymore. Lu Gongzan did not know how to live like this. In fact, most people did not know either. They were born into this world. Regardless of the environment or the conditions for growth, they had no choice. Many people might have different thoughts and longings, but they were limited by reality. Most of the time, what a person would become after a long time was not something he could decide himself. Instead, it was what the environment changed him into. For these people, if nothing unexpected happened, the path of their lives had been planned from the moment they were born. They could see the end with a glance. Why would they need to think about how to live? Only a very small number of lucky people were born to stand at the peak. Thus, they could decide what path they should take in the future. Even so, there were many restrictions on these people. A year ago, Lu Gongzan belonged to the majority of people. Now he had become the latter. He had a long lifespan and great power that surpassed ordinary people. Thus, he could try to do something he wanted to do. For example, today's debt repayment. As for Li Yunxin, Lao Dao frowned. Brother Xian, what do you mean by that? Li Yunxin was silent for a while and sighed. In the past, I did not know why I was alive. Mortals are affected by lust and their lives are indeed very bitter. But I know what I live for, to live for my parents, to live for my wife and children. There are also people who say that they want to live for themselves. But now that I think about it, I'm really only living for myself. I'm just like how I used to be. I don't know why. What am I? He was a single person, but he also carried the expectations and emotions of many people. Whenever we talk about the concept of self, we are not talking about an individual, but a net and a point that is made up of all of our emotional and social relationships. Without this net, for example, there is only one person in this world. Then what does he use to please himself? In fact, there is nothing that can please himself. Li Yunxin said in a low voice, I know this. I only look at the flowers on horseback and I don't care about anyone. The prosperity of the human world is like passing clouds to me, but there will always be a time when I get tired of it. I should thank the 9th young master, thank the Freemasonry, thank Shen Men's Munanju. If it weren't for these people who put me in a dangerous situation of life and death, maybe I would be tired of this world even faster. At that time, maybe suicide is the only way to choose. Lao Dao was about to speak after hearing this. Li Yunxin shook his head and smiled. Lonely. It's lonely at the top. So, I have to catch something. Life is a vast ocean and people are lonely boats. If I don't want to drift with the current, I have to give myself an anchor. Lu Gongzan fell into deep thought after hearing this. He frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly he asked, Brother Exe, didn't you have this anchor in the past? Li Yunxin smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. Which past are you asking about? Lao Dao hesitated for a long time. Finally he said something he had wanted to say for a long time. Can you tell me all of them? It was already late at night. The clouds parted and the moon shone brightly. Li Yunxin sat on a smooth blue stone, bathing in the moonlight. He was silent for a while before saying, Okay. But there must be wine. After saying this, he flipped his palm and took out a silver pot. He put it on the rock and looked at it. He said, It's still cold. So he felt in his sleeve and took out a small red clay stove. This stove was used to warm wine. It was very small and unique. Placed on the blue stone, Li Yunxin in white next to it, it was like a painting. He flicked his finger and a rootless fire burned under the stove. After a while there was some warmth. Lu Gongzan thought for a while and jumped on the blue stone, sitting opposite Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin reached out and gouged out 2 stones from the rock. Then he stuck out his sharp nails and dug out the inside. Thus they became 2 wine cups. He and Lu Gongzan each had a cup, but they didn't put the silver pot on the stove to warm it. Both of them liked drinking cold wine, but didn't like cold food. The last time I sat with you like this was in the city of Wei. Li Yunxin said, that night I wanted to take over Long Jiu's body. Lao Dao poured wine for him, then for himself. They raised their cups without a word. The 2 drank it in one gulp. Li Yunxin smacked his lips and laughed. Without wine, it becomes drinking to drown one's sorrows. So he stretched out his hand and gouged out 4 round green pebbles from the rock beneath him. He looked at the stones and put his hand on the stove. He squinted his eyes and looked at the stones in the heat and shimmer. He said in a low voice, there was an old man. He drank and ate like this. After saying this he was silent for a long time. In the darkness of the night, his face was slightly yellowed by the light from the fire in the small stove. Lu Gongzan knew that when he spoke in such a tone and fell into such silence, he was ready to reminisce about the past. He clearly looked young, but he had many fleeting memories to look back on. I don't remember how old I was when I was adopted. 7 or 8 or 9 years old, probably when I was a child. Li Yunxin opened his mouth and said in a low and light voice, I probably told you about this before. I had a vulgar background and grew up in an orphanage. Just like a charity. Lu Gongzan nodded. Then an old man came. At that time, he was about the same age as you. He had 1 eye and didn't look kind at all. His words were like thunder. He always roared. But it's not like his ears are bad. Li Yunxin reached out and turned the stones on the stove as if he was roasting meat. The stones were turned over and didn't make a sound. He reached out and picked up some snow that had fallen from the tree and scattered it on the stove. Finally it cried out. It sizzled as if the fat on the meat was dripping. Choose some children. I didn't like any of them. I was asked. I said this child might have some mental problems. You would be a burden if you brought him back. The old man asked, can he take care of himself? Is he obedient? He said, he is obedient and can take care of himself. The old man said, that's it. Lu Gongzan shook his head and laughed. There's something wrong with his brain. At that time I thought they were weird. They also thought I was weird. I didn't want to talk to them. I couldn't understand why they were always laughing and crying. Li Yunxin flicked his cup. He picked out the wine from the silver pot and filled their cups again. He held the cup in silence for a while and drank it in one gulp. Then he brought me back. He named me Li Si. Li Si is in Zhang San Li Si. The old man was a fortune teller. He was in his 60s and his health wasn't good. His life had been smooth and he made a few small fortunes. He felt that he could be considered a master. He didn't want his skills to be lost. But he was alone and wanted to find someone with a tough life to teach him. So he found you? Li Yunxin smiled slightly. It wasn't me. I found a very smart child. He knew how to read people's thoughts and expressions. Unfortunately, his fortune-telling skills weren't that good. He was lucky to make a fortune. A few rich people supported him and gave him some money. He became complacent and spent money everywhere. Then his luck ran out and he didn't see right and he became depressed again. He thought that raising that child and disciple was no problem. In the end, both of their livelihoods became a problem. What should I do? I had to think of a good idea. At that time there was a subsidy. It was said that the orphanage would give a handicapped child. Then I was chosen. Lu Gongzan was surprised. With such a court, it's really a blessing for the common people. Li Yunxin laughed. I was thinking of adopting a handicapped child. It didn't cost much to raise this child and I could still make some money. If it was a smart child like me who could take care of himself, he could even serve them. Then I came out. And then that smart child died. Died? In the summer I ran out to play. I ran to the railway to catch dragonflies and put nails on them. One time, a train accidentally fell on the railway and was crushed into meat paste. Li Yunxin said, it was an accident. This kind of thing can't be helped. Lu Gongzan pursed his lips. After thinking for a while, he also drank the wine in his cup. The old man was sad for a while, but he recovered soon. But I'll be fine soon. Li Yunxin snorted softly. It was hard to tell if he was snorting with a smile, or if he was just breathing unconsciously. At first, I thought that child was smart and learned everything quickly. Slowly, I realized that he didn't learn quickly. He didn't learn anything. He would only say obedient words in front of the old man to coax him. Once he was out, he would be exposed. Some people have high EQ but not high IQ. Is probably this kind of person. Lao Dao raised the pot and was about to pour the third cup of wine for the two of them. However, there was a rustling sound in the pot, as if some ice had formed in the wine. Therefore, he didn't use his divine ability, but only brought the silver pot to the side of the stove and slowly roasted it, and then it was what I told you before. I lived a stable life. I had clothes to wear and food to eat. The old man originally raised me like a dog. After that child died, he beat me up and planned to find another disciple. But I'm not really stupid. When he taught that child, I listened on the side. It was very easy and I understood after listening to it once. Slowly, I also learned some of the human heart, so I talked to him and used some tricks. He realized that I wasn't really stupid. In other words, although I was stupid, I excelled in a certain field. Chapter 587. He thought it was bad luck to be in that line of work, prying into the secrets of the heavens. Or he could believe in Buddhism and do good deeds to accumulate good karma, but he didn't believe in those. Therefore, I felt that since my fate was not good and I had to offend the heavenly cursed lone star, it was fine to find someone like me as a disciple. In the future I'll have nothing to worry about and live a lonely life. There's nothing to distract me with. Then teach me. Lu Gongzan sighed and poured the third cup of wine for the two of them. Then it was still very hard. The old man likes to drink. Li Yunxin picked up the third cup and downed it. At the beginning of the month I have money, so I eat and drink to my heart's content. I don't have any money at the end of the month and I can't borrow money anywhere. What should I do? At this point, his lips curled into a smile. This smile seemed sincere and pure. He raised his hand and pointed at the stove. Pick up a few pebbles to go with the wine. Roast it slowly. When it's hot, it's ready to eat. Sprinkle some salt on it. Put it in your mouth and smack it. A glass of wine. As he spoke, he picked up a pebble that had been roasted until it was slightly red. He looked at it and put it in his mouth. There was a sizzling sound and steam came out of his mouth and nose. Smacking his lips, he chewed on it like he was chewing on a candy bean and swallowed it. Lu Gongzan was stunned. He quickly poured a fourth cup for the two of them, and Li Yunxin drank it in one gulp. Sometimes when he was drunk he would say to me, Grandpa treats you as his own grandson. Grandpa will have to depend on you when he dies. Of course he couldn't remember anything after he woke up. He was still merciless when he beat and scolded them. I remember the number of fractures. I can't remember the exact number. Later, someone came to pay a visit. I caught him hitting me. It was time to go to school. I thought, oh, I can still go to school. The visitor asked me if I wanted to leave. I thought, what the old man is teaching me is interesting, and I haven't finished learning it yet. Let's wait and see. Just say you're not leaving. Then they gave me more subsidies and forced me to go to school. Li Yunxin shook his head and smiled. Only after I went to school did I realize that reading is more interesting. It turned out that not all people were idiots. There were also some smart people who wrote very smart things. At first, he went to a special education school. Later on, his results were not bad and he was reported in the papers. People would say, oh, he's actually a genius. That's why I transferred to another school and kept studying. I was about 11 when I was in primary school. I was about 18 when I got my master's degree. Master. It's similar to a cultivation realm. Li Yunxin said, for example, in the secular world, the great painters of the emptiness realm are incredible. At that time, I had probably reached the pinnacle of the conception realm. The old Taoist nodded. After all, he had traveled the world for decades, so he could understand. I didn't see him much in those few years and his health was getting worse, so I guess we were on good terms. So it was only one eye. The remaining eye wasn't that good either. When I met people, I would bring up the newspaper and say, this is my grandson, he's going to take care of me when I'm old. Actually, it was Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, you know? Lu Gongzan shook his head and sighed sympathetically. I know. I'm getting senile. Li Yunxin smiled noncommittally. He picked up the second stone from the stove and put it in his mouth. His eyes were unfocused as he chewed slowly. After swallowing it, he didn't open his mouth and ate another piece. After the fifth glass of wine, he said, and then, one day, the day I graduated, I was studying in another province. It's in another prefecture capital. The old man is acting up. He insists that he wants to see me parade the streets. But he didn't have money. Just like before, he asked around. When he found out where the opening ceremony was, he ran there and wanted to bless people and earn money. That day was the opening ceremony of a clubhouse. The boss wasn't a good person. Lu Gongzan smiled awkwardly. This was what he used to do. Perhaps when Brother Xian first met him, he became close to him after entering the city of Wei, and even settled down in the Dragon King Temple. It was because of the previous life. It could be considered a good fate. But he frowned slightly and sighed. He knew that what followed would not be a warm story. The old man was silly at that time. He ran to the door and said some inauspicious things. Probably it was a bloody disaster when he would lose money and what the master wanted. He didn't do such things in the past, saying it was embarrassing. That day he was possessed and said it was very unpleasant. If it was normal, he would coax them away and give them some money. This boss used to be a vagabond. He had a lot of properties under his name. He didn't need to come to the opening ceremony of a small clubhouse. But he was in a good mood, so he came to take a look. Then he ran into this. That's good, an old immortal, invite him in. Then he invited him to drink, said a group of people gathered in the hall to watch him drink. The old man hadn't drunk for a long time. So he drank freely, and became delirious again. Then the boss said that the old immortal had enjoyed himself. Give him a red packet and send him away safely. Li Yunxin smiled, drove him to the crossroads, dropped him off and left. Lu Gongzan was silent. At this point the people in this world might not understand. But he could understand it now. Li Yunxin had described to him some aspects of the previous world, so he knew that the cars there did not use horses. The iron shell was very powerful. That old man died, probably on the road under the car. Then I went back and found out about it. I asked first and found out that it was already done. That person was famous and had many connections. No one could make things difficult for him. Then how did I feel at that time? Actually, there was no special feeling. People die when they die. Everyone would die one day, right? But I don't seem to have anything to do. Li Yunxin frowned slightly and said in a low voice, I used to be young and didn't know anything. As long as he was alive, so be it. Then I met the old man and was beaten and scolded, but I found life a little more interesting. In fact, life has always been interesting, not necessarily because of him. Maybe it would have been more interesting if I met someone else. But now that he is gone, what should I do in the future? I thought about it, and for the first time I felt a little anxious. It was like a ship. There used to be a port. Now that the port was destroyed, it floated on the sea. Then who am I? What do I want to do? Where do I want to go? I don't know. So I need an anchor. Li Yunxin glanced at the wine pot. Lu Gongzan silently picked up the wine pot and was about to pour him wine. But the pot was light. It was empty. Li Yunxin crushed the cup in his palm. He picked up a few large pieces of stone and slowly put them on the stove. Then I will take revenge, he said. This can be an anchor. That person is powerful and I am just a young man with nothing. I came little by little and lived for revenge. It is good to have a goal in life like this. Actually, like those ghosts, they must have an obsession. Without their obsession, they would become a lonely boat that would vanish into thin air. It took me 10 years. I caught him, and then started my revenge. This time Li Yunxin paused for a long time. Then he picked up the fourth pebble and ate it. But at that time I suddenly thought of a problem. After I take revenge, what should I do? After taking revenge there is nothing to do. What is the point of living? Since there is no point, why not die? There are many feelings in the world that I can slowly observe and slowly imitate. Only when I die, maybe I don't need to imitate the feelings I have when I die. Maybe I can really experience it. So I decided to die and see. It is not a big deal. After taking revenge I will also die. How about asking this person to do me a favor? Let's find an opportunity to find his men. Then he was killed, covered his face with a towel, and suffocated to death. Li Yunxin thought for a while. Unfortunately, I still don't feel anything. Lu Gongzan moved his lips and lightly exhaled. Then after coming here, the situation was similar for a long time. I experienced something, but I don't know if I can rely on it. I am afraid of the feeling of drifting with the current. Then I met you. Li Yunxin raised his head and looked at Lu Gongzan. You're like an old man. I tried to find an anchor for myself, to find a way to go back and complete my revenge. Then I can have fun in this world again. But recently I began to panic again because it has been less than a year. Li Yunxin sighed. I reached the profound realm from the emptiness realm. I don't dare to think about what will happen after a year. If I find a way to go back after a year, what should I do? So, on Cloudy Mountain I only said that I reached the profound realm. I am afraid that if I have more power, things will go more smoothly. Lu Gongzan was speechless. I am afraid that I will advance too fast. Only Li Yunxin could say such arrogant words. Lu Gongzan wouldn't feel that something was amiss if he said it. Instead, Lu Gongzan could understand his distress. At this time, the gravel on the stove was slightly red from the heat. Li Yunxin flicked his finger and extinguished the rootless fire under the stove. He collected the gravel in his palm and put it into his mouth. But now, I think I shouldn't be like this. He chewed the gravel loudly as he spoke. His voice was still very clear. I used to have a problem with my head. I don't have it now. You are right to say that I am childish. I'm like a child now. I have to experience all the love and sorrow from the beginning. My previous life is almost non-existent. But I have the memory of my previous life, so I am afraid to try new feelings. If a person is not born ignorant, who would be willing to experience the so-called sorrow and hurt again and again, and then grow up in the process? But now, I know that I can't. I can't wrap myself in a shell for the rest of my life. However brave this shell makes me, it also makes me cowardly. So I think, maybe I need a new anchor. He shook his head. I still need some time. Before I get through this time, I still need a new anchor. Otherwise I will panic again. Lu Gongzan was thoughtful for a while before he said, Your new anchor, what is it? Li Yunxin stood up. Under the moonlight he said, It's you. You and I are relatives, teachers and friends. We entrust our lives to each other. I've taught you a lot and you have taught me a lot. Thanks to your care, I am living a good life. I also dare to slowly see the world and experience some things. In my previous life, I experienced some precious feelings, but I didn't know it. In this life, I re-experienced the feelings of my previous life in you. Only then did I know who I was in the past and what kind of life I lived. But these? I didn't know much before. I only realized it when I saw Li Chunfeng today. Li Yunxin smiled. So, don't die. Otherwise, I will be a lonely boat. Lu Gongzan was stunned for a while. Then he took a deep breath and stood up slowly. Brother X and I? He said in a low voice, I didn't know before. Li Yunxin smiled. Go. I'm not a child anymore. Lu Gongzan frowned and stared at him. After a long time, his brows relaxed and he said loudly, Okay. This time, I will ride the wind and leave. I will pay my debts, take revenge, and come back alive. I will accompany you to find out, what is the purpose of living forever in this world and what should it be for? After saying these words, he no longer hesitated and lingered. The Taoist robe on his body suddenly fluttered, and his whole body flew with the wind, directly shooting toward the horizon. Only his faint voice could be heard, Fast wind. This wind also caused Li Yunxin's cloak and robe to flutter violently. He sighed in a low and gentle voice and laughed. Send the gentleman off with the wind. You will know once we part. Chapter 588. So, you are the only elegant man in Whitewater Town. Look at this place, watching the sea and listening to the waves. Wow, how grand and spacious it is. The speaker stood on the wooden balcony. He wore a white robe with red embroidery and gold threads. His curly black hair was tied behind his head, but a few strands hung down his cheeks. His eyebrows and eyes were deeper than those of ordinary people from the Central Plains. Now he raised his hands and sighed while facing the sea, looking like a madman. The balcony was built on a cliff by the sea, which was not very high. Behind it was a guest room that wasn't luxurious, but was definitely elegant and unique. It was very big, it could almost be called a palace. In the distance there was the vast sea under the hazy sky. The waves on the sea were a little big, with layers of white waves stacked on top of each other. They rushed over and hit the cliff under the balcony, rolling up large pieces of snow and bringing a fishy smell like iron. The person who spoke sighed with emotion. He then turned around and looked at the man in white who was sitting idly in the room. Only you and I can enjoy this scenery. What would other people in the town say? They say it's damp, fishy and harmful. I, Lu Baishui, have dominated the Western countries for more than 10 years. How do you feel now? Have I lived a short life? Now it was winter. There were icicles hanging on the edge of the balcony. But the man called Lu Baishui only wore a thin robe, and his chest was exposed. It seemed that his body was very healthy and strong as he said. But compared to him, the man in white in the room seemed to be afraid of the cold. A white fox fur cloak was hanging on the side. He was wearing a thick winter coat with a fur collar up to his neck. There was a brazier in front of him with the charcoal fire flickering. There was an iron grill on the brazier with 5 or 6 chestnuts roasting. The fierce sea wind blew in. He squinted at Lu Baishui and smiled. "Brother Lu, your machete skills are first class in the world. Your internal force is even more vigorous. Of course I have nothing to say. But didn't you say there was a woman who lived here before? Is she not a refined person?" Lu Baishui waved his hand. "Of course, a woman is not a refined person. She should be a beauty." After saying this, he blinked his eyes and said, "Ever since I accidentally mentioned that woman today, Brother Li has already asked around 4 times. Could it be that you recognize her?" Thus, the extremely handsome man in front of him smiled again. "Nothing can be hidden from Brother Lu. I came to the east this time to look for someone." "Oh? Who are you looking for?" "Madam." The man in white smiled. "When I was in my teens there was a huge change in my family. My mother is missing. Recently I heard that he might have left some traces in Donghai. Some even said that he might be in the Dragon Islands. That is why I am here, and to go out to sea to find it if need be." "Go to sea?" Lu Baishui raised his eyebrows. "Now?" The man in white was still smiling. "She is my mother after all." Lu Baishui shook his head. "Although you and I have only known each other for a few days, I know that your inner strength is stronger than mine. But going out to sea in this season is not a wise move. Dragon Island outside the sea." He squinted his eyes and turned to look at the vast sea. "Everyone says it's a legend. Some people say that their ship drifted to the Dragon Island after a shipwreck. But the appearance of the Dragon Island in everyone's mouth is different, so it is not enough to prove it. Brother Li, if you want to go out to sea to find the Dragon Island in this season, it will be difficult." The man in white grunted in acknowledgement. He lowered his eyes and thought for a while, then sighed. "Even Brother Lu thinks so." His words were full of melancholy. Lu Baishui hurriedly waved his hand. "Hey Brother Li, don't be like this. Let me think." Lu Baishui seemed to be a warm-hearted hero. Seeing that this man was lonely, he frowned and paced back and forth in the room. Then he turned to look at him seriously. "Brother Li, let me ask you first. The woman you mentioned and the woman I mentioned. I brought a portrait with me." The man in white reached into his sleeve and took out a small scroll. He paused and unfolded it in front of him. He stared at it for a while and sighed. "My mother's name is Shangguanyu. I have been carrying this for many years." Lu Baishui walked over to take a look. He was stunned when he saw it. Then he looked at the man in white. "Brother Li, is this really your mother?" The man in white, or Li Yunxin, smiled faintly. "My mother had a miraculous encounter when she was young. She obtained a scroll of nourishment of life. She practiced it for many years. It can be considered a technique to preserve her youth." Lu Baishui stared at the portrait for a while and took a step back. "If this portrait is correct, the person who stayed in this room last spring is your mother." Li Yunxin raised his head. "Brother Lu, please elaborate." But Lu Baishui took another step back and looked at Li Yunxin carefully. "Brother Li, before I say anything let me ask you first. Did you know that someone saw your mother in my shop so you came to make friends with me, or did you hear me mention it today?" Li Yunxin took a deep breath and her expression became solemn. "If there is any falsehood in my words, let my body and soul perish. I will never be able to cultivate any more profound martial arts in this life." Lu Baishui immediately frowned. "Hey, Brother Li, how can you say that?" "Hey, it's my fault. I was just asking casually." Li Yunxin's oath made this hero feel ashamed. He sighed and said, "Oh? I was just afraid that you might have something else. Forget it. I was being a villain and was being too careful to guess your heart." Li Yunxin said seriously. "Brother Lu, you are a straightforward man and don't hide anything. That is the way of a gentleman. Since you and I are on the same wavelength, there is nothing we can't talk about. Brother Lu, don't take it to heart." Lu Baishui still shook his head. "It's my fault. It's my fault." Li Yunxin met Lu Baishui 4 days ago. Now he was in the viewing room of the Donghai Inn. The Donghai Inn was in the northeast of Whitewater Town. Whitewater Town was under the jurisdiction of the Donghai Kingdom's Stormy Waves Road. As for the Donghai Kingdom, it was a small place. Its territory was about the same as the former Yu Kingdom, only about the size of a prefecture in the Qing Kingdom. Li Yunxin said goodbye to Lu Gongzan and headed east before he realized this problem. Everyone knew that Dragon Island was in the east and that Shinryu lived on it. He also knew that the true dragon lived on the Dragon Island, but where was the Dragon Island? To the east of the Donghai Kingdom was the vast sea. It would be difficult to find Dragon Island. He had the imperial map of heaven and earth in his hand, and the location of Dragon Island was indeed marked on the map. But what was worse was that the marked Dragon Island was represented by dotted lines. This meant that either the map was not certain, or the location of Dragon Island had changed. So he asked with the talisman he had left with by Yunxin. It was true. There were very few people who had been on Dragon Island. Even the few who had been were summoned by Shinryu. It was unprecedented that the former Lord Dongting went to Dragon Island by himself. At that time, the news of Lord Dongting's death on Dragon Island spread so fast. He didn't know if this was a factor in it. Maybe he could wait for Shinryu to summon him. But with his temperament, he didn't like to be in a passive situation. He wanted to sneak in quietly, or take a look around the perimeter before doing so. Because there was another purpose for this trip. To find Shang Guanyu. He had to be familiar with her so that he wouldn't be embarrassed. This kind of thing that even demons and cultivators couldn't do was very difficult. But after entering the Donghai Kingdom, Li Yunxin found that the customs here were very different. Although the countries along the way had different customs, the East Sea nation was the exception among the others. For example, the people of Li Kingdom, Qin Kingdom, Yi Kingdom and other countries in the Central Plains believed in immortals and demons. But this belief was not absolute belief. It was more like a custom that permeated every aspect of life. When they encountered difficulties, they prayed for blessings from heaven. When they encountered bad luck, they scolded demons for causing trouble. They believed that there were demons and immortals in the world. But it was hard to believe that those things would really appear in front of them. For example, everyone knew about the existence of Shinryu and thought that the wind, thunder, clouds and rain in the sky were all controlled by the Dragon King. But where were the dragons and what did they look like? Maybe there were many self-proclaimed knowledgeable people who smiled and thought that this kind of thing was only spread in the marketplace. If they really looked into it, it would be ridiculous. But the Donghai Kingdom was different. Almost everyone that Li Yunxin had met believed in the existence of Shinryu and knew that it lived on Dragon Island. There were also many people who swore that they had seen the dragon's body. In the hearts of the Donghai people, Shinryu was not a vague image, nor was it an illusory god in the legends. Instead, it was tangible and could even be touched. He had also seen a holy image of Shinryu painted by the Donghai people, which was very similar to the Lord of Shinryu he had seen. Because of this, Li Yunxin realized one thing. Maybe because the Donghai Kingdom was very close to Dragon Island, Shinryu might have been here more than once. That was why there was such a strong belief. Since this was the case, it meant that the Donghai people, especially the people of Baishui town, said that they had seen Dragon Island was true. So he planned to start with these mortals. On one hand, he could fool people. Ever since he fled from the mountain village in Dingzhou until he met Li Chunfeng in the mountain village, he seemed to have been in the sights of Munanju and the Freemasonry. At this time he felt that he had temporarily escaped from that net. So he didn't want to be in the sights of those people again. Since this was the case, he had to do something unexpected. Who would have thought that the Lord of Wei River would ask mortals where Dragon Island was and how to get there? On the other hand, there was a vast ocean to the east of Donghai, which was no different from the ocean that Li Yunxin had seen in his previous life. But he knew that if he went further, it would not be seawater. It would be something called weak water. One couldn't float on the weak water. The magical powers of demons and cultivators would be gradually weakened by the weak water, and they would eventually lose their strength. If Dragon Island was surrounded by the weak water, then if he wanted to sneak across, he would have to travel with mortals. It was true that fiendish demons had powerful bodies. But in the vast world and the vast ocean, once he lost his magical powers, no matter how strong his body was, it would be no different than a grain of sand in the vast ocean. At that time he could only rely on human ships. When he came here from Dingzhou he was very fast. Shanji, who accompanied the ninth young master, was much slower than him because he had extra instructions from Li Yunxin. He stayed in Baishui town for a few days and learned that they would arrive in a dozen more days, so he wandered around a bit more. He liked the prosperity of the human world and the customs here were different, so he felt comfortable. Then he happened to hear someone mention that he had seen a woman at the East Sea Inn in town last spring. It was said that the woman was very beautiful, so the speaker, the owner of the cosmetics shop opposite the Donghai Inn, had a deep impression of her. He also said that the woman's surname was very rare in Donghai Kingdom. It was Shangguan. As everyone knew, people with compound surnames were mostly descendants of the royal family in Midland. Thus, even 2 years later the boss still remembered it vividly. Then he heard it from Li Yunxin. He spent 3 days investigating the person who spoke and confirmed that this person wasn't sent by some other force to spread the news and trap him. Then he walked into the Donghai Inn. He got to know Lu Baishui. Lu Baishui was a big shot in Baishui town and even in Donghai Kingdom. It was said that he was an orphan when he was young, and grew up in Baishui town. When he was 13 or 14 he went out to wander in Jianghu, but he almost died. But in the end he was chosen by an elder of the sect of Flame in the West Plains, and was accepted as a disciple. After he finished his studies he started to wander and became a merchant. He traveled back and forth between the East and West, earned a lot of money and met many heroes. After he became famous he returned to Baishui town and built the Donghai Inn. Everyone in the town knew that he would come here to spend the winter in winter. Of course, the most important thing was that he had money and time. People like him had traveled all over the world, and although he didn't hate the world, he would gradually lose interest in many things. Besides, he was a hero who was good at martial arts. He had to think about other things. Since he was born in Baishui town he grew up listening to the legends of Shinryu and Dragon Island. Although he was not as faithful as the people of Donghai Kingdom after traveling for more than 10 years, it also made him think about something else. Where were Shinryu and Dragon Island? What else was above the vast sea? He thought he had seen most of the things on the land. He wanted to see what was on the sea. Everyone in the town knew what he was thinking. Li Yunxin also knew. Wasn't he the best candidate? It wasn't hard to get to know Lu Baishui. Handsome people were hard to hate. Lu Baishui probably wanted to get to know someone who was handsome and good at martial arts. If it was a handsome, knowledgeable, well-versed man who could get along well with him, then it would be a treasure bestowed by the heavens. Li Yunxin's observation skill was the best in the world. On the first night, Lu Baishui talked to him by candlelight, regretted not meeting him earlier, and invited him to the sea listening wave pavilion. Although he approached this guy with other intentions at first. But slowly, after 4 days of interaction, even Li Yunxin also realized that this person was indeed not annoying. He was even somewhat likable. So he thought, could this guy be used? The reason why he had this idea was that there was another unexpected thing. The little demon protector that he had created had become very popular in Donghai Kingdom. Chapter 589. What was more surprising was that he didn't hear the words, little demon protection from a demon, but from a mortal. Lu Baishui. Lu Baishui's understanding of demons and ghosts was similar to that of the people in the Central Plains. He wasn't sure if the Dragon Island and Shinryu really existed, but he was sure that demons and ghosts existed. He had seen demons and even made friends with 1 or 2 when he traveled around the Midland. He had been close to Li Yunxin these days so he mentioned it casually. He said that he was a brother of a demon near Whitewater Town, and they often talked to each other. Before Li Yunxin came, he heard from that demon that something big happened in the monster realm. Shinryu and Dragon Sun created a little demon protection, to restrict the demons and ghosts in the world to do good deeds and benefit the people. From what he said, that demon wasn't a fierce demon king, but a little demon. He was naturally interested in it. But the kings in other places didn't like it so they wouldn't pay attention to it. When Lu Baishui talked about it, he showed a mysterious and proud expression which was rarely seen. Maybe this was a rare secret in the human world to him. Li Yunxin was surprised that there was a demon in the vicinity of Whitewater Town. Because after the Cloud Mountain battle, the number of demons and cultivators decreased sharply, and they should be less common than before. But then he realized that the impact of that battle on the East Sea nation should be very small, not to mention other places. Near the Dragon Island, who would listen to Dragon Sun's call and die. But he knew that more and more people knew about what he had done. Now this legendary hero of the secular world was standing in front of him, and his face was still filled with guilt and annoyance, because of the question he had asked before. Lu Baishui was arrogant and headstrong but he wasn't stupid. Otherwise he would have died on the road and wouldn't have lived until now. 2 years ago, an outstanding woman stayed in his inn. Now Li Yunxin also stayed here. Moreover, he took the portrait and asked about it. Naturally, he had to wonder if they had any ulterior motives. If it was, then he would inevitably be greatly disappointed in this person and might even become enemies. Unexpectedly, this Li Yunxin, the Li Yunxin who for the past 4 days had made him feel as if he was bathed in a spring breeze, as if he was a righteous and peaceful man of ancient times, was actually not a human. Furthermore, he was a fellow who spoke nonsense without any pressure and had no flaws. With his usual shrewdness, he sensed that something might be amiss. But then he felt that his usual shrewdness was for the vulgar and the vulgar of the world. To question this extraordinary person in front of him, wasn't that an insult to his dignity? Moreover, he was forced to solemnly swear such a poisonous oath. Looking at Li Yunxin's calm face and even comforting him, Lu Baishui was overwhelmed with a myriad of emotions, and felt even more ashamed. After letting out a long sigh, he slammed his fist into his palm. Good. Leave it to me. I'll prepare these days. Once I'm ready, I'll go out to sea with Brother Li. Listening to the sea and watching the waves. How can it compare to sailing directly to the sea? He learned this sentence from Li Yunxin. These days, Wei River Dragon King had told Lu Baishui a lot of strange things about the sea. Of course, it was in the way that the spring rain moistened everything silently. Li Yunxin stood up and frowned. Brother Lu Baishui waved his hand. Hey, don't persuade me. Just pretend that I'm not doing this for you. I've always wanted to go out to the sea to see what's out there, and what Shinryu Dragon Island looks like. Moreover, he paused and looked at Li Yunxin. Brother Li, you found the right person. Your mother has indeed gone out to sea. Li Yunxin opened his eyes wide. Brother Lu, are you serious? Yes. Lu Baishui sighed. It was last year when she came. At the end of last spring, I remember that the sea sparrows were fat at that time. I came to see if there was anything to collect. She lived in this shop. I chose this room. I talked to her for a while. I was surprised at that time. But now that I heard that your mother used to practice Taoist spells, I think it's normal. She spoke very mysteriously at that time. Li Yunxin heaved a sigh of relief. She was alone. Lu Baishui said, alone. I didn't see her being threatened or anything else. But I could tell that she was unhappy and depressed. I've never seen her smile before. Lu Baishui stopped and looked at Li Yunxin carefully. Li Yunxin sat down slowly and heaved a sigh of relief. Brother Lu, please continue. Alas. Okay. She stayed there for about 3 or 4 days and often went out. Brother Li, you know that I like to make friends with interesting people. I found someone to follow your mother. I didn't mean any harm. Your mother was good at maintaining her looks. At that time Oh, Brother Li, don't. Li Yunxin smiled. It's human nature. Brother Lu, don't take it to heart. This Brother Li had always been like this, gentle, cultured, and reasonable. He didn't look like a martial arts master, but he was. Lu Baishui admired him the most because of this. So he also laughed. That's all. Later I found out that your mother asked some people in town. She asked how to go to the sea and where the Dragon Island was. She asked for about 3 or 4 days. She found a gambling addict called Li Si. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. Li Si. Ha. This name was given by someone else. Lu Baishui smiled. He was a fisherman. No one in this town would dare to say that he was good at sailing, could tell the weather, and could distinguish between wind and rain. Unfortunately, he was lazy and liked to gamble. He was so poor that he didn't want to go to the sea. He often said that he had seen the Dragon Island and knew how to get there. But no one believed him. They thought he was trying to cheat money. I don't know how your mother persuaded him. The next day, she bought a 2-masted boat that used to sail along the coast. She hired a dozen boatmen and went out to sea. At that time, everyone who knew about this felt bad. I also tried to persuade her. Lu Baishui shook his head. The dozen people Li Si hired weren't easy to deal with. Your mother was like that. So I thought that once she went to the sea, she would be in danger. Li Si probably just wanted to cheat money. But who knew if she would think of something else? But no one could persuade her. She went out to sea that night. Now that I heard about your mother's past, I know that I worried for nothing. Those lowly things aren't a match for your mother. Li Yunxin stared at him. What happened after that? After that, it's hard to explain. Lu Baishui raised his eyes and looked outside the balcony. Originally, the sky was dark and gloomy. But at this time, some orange light came from the horizon and plated the sea with a faint golden light. But this light was the setting sun. It was a gloomy day. In the evening, the sea gradually cleared up. I'll take you there. Lu Baishui said, I'll tell you after we see it. See who? Li Si. Whitewater Town in winter was gray. It also snowed, but not heavily. So it melted at noon and froze in the morning and evening. The pure white snow turned into dirty ash, covering the narrow streets and low houses. The Donghaian was built on a cliff that was not high. On the cliff, on the slope, there were some more magnificent buildings, and the road was also paved with bluestone. Along the slope, there was a large area of residential areas and restaurants. Mixed together, high and low were scattered. Although it also snowed and froze, it was warmer than inland further north. According to Li Yunxin, the temperature here in early winter was about 1 or 2 degrees below zero. Even in the middle of winter, it was only 10 degrees below zero. Therefore there were still many people who came here during the winter. Because the sea near Whitewater Town was rich in several kinds of special seafood in autumn. Nowadays it was hard to travel and it was even harder to keep fresh. So it was made into pickled food. Gradually, it became a special delicacy and gradually became famous. So when the late autumn passed and winter came, when the food was pickled, people from nearby counties would come to taste it. In some people's eyes, it was a kind of life atmosphere. When they walked down the road, it was just in time for dinner. Many tourists and diners from other places crowded into the street from their warm houses, rushing to several restaurants on the cliff. They were reluctant to stay but willing to eat. So they stayed in the inn at the foot of the cliff, and only went to the top of the cliff when sightseeing. This was very much like Little Rock Canyon in the Yi Kingdom. It was also a high-end commercial district, built high on the top of the mountain, and looked like a tourist. But considering the amazing gap between the rich and the poor in this era, this marketing strategy was reasonable. After all, they only opened their doors to a few people. Thus the two of them swam against the current. Looking at Li Yunxin's clothes, it was obvious that he was a rich man. Lu Baishui's clothes were also very recognizable in Whitewater Town. So there was no crowd on the road. Those who knew him made way for him. Those who didn't also made way for him. After walking for a quarter of an hour, they arrived at the foot of the cliff, and it was already dark. The lights slowly lit up and the town was no longer gray but warm yellow. Passing through a large number of low-rise houses, Lu Baishui took Li Yunxin to the south of the town. There were gradually fewer houses, and they began to see large areas of untrodden snow and withered trees propped up like poles. "That's Li Si's house in front of us," Lu Baishui said to Li Yunxin as he stepped on the icy, bumpy road. And he raised his hand and pointed. There was a small courtyard in front of them, standing alone outside the town. The low walls, which seemed to be made of crushed stones, were covered with yellow soil, and the roof was also covered with thatch. There were no people around, and the low, lifeless hills in the distance were behind it. At this time they were still 100 steps away from the courtyard, but Li Yunxin could already hear people in the courtyard. And there were many of them. Then he noticed the road under his feet. The roads in this era were mostly dirt roads. There was a layer of snow, and if there were not many people walking, only some footprints would be left. However, the road under their feet was melted and frozen, and then melted again. Obviously there were many people walking on it. Li Si's house was very lively. Later only he came back. He said that the boat was destroyed in a storm. Everyone else had died but he was the only one alive. He said. Lu Baishui turned to look at Li Yunxin. "Brother Li, do you know the legend of the Spirit Mountain on the sea?" Li Yunxin thought for a while. "I heard about it when I was a kid. Dragon Island is a spirit mountain, and there are also Penglai Yingzhou and Fanghu. They said that only the fated people can see it." "Yes." Lu Baishui shook his head and looked at Li Yunxin worriedly. Li Si said that after the boat was destroyed he met an immortal, goddess Penglai of Penglai Spirit Mountain, and she saved him. He also said that if she taught him magic he would know whether it was good or bad. Li Yunxin frowned. "He's the only one alive." Lu Baishui hurriedly said, "His words may not be credible. Since your mother is good at martial arts and knows Taoist magic, she won't be in trouble. That's why I brought Brother Li here. Don't worry about it." Li Yunxin nodded wordlessly. Soon the two arrived outside the courtyard. Looking in through the open wooden door, they saw more than a dozen people standing inside. Most of them were women and old people. Judging from their clothes, they didn't have a good life. Their faces were either sad or numb. Standing in the cold wind of the winter evening, they looked into the house. The door was not closed. He allowed the cold wind to rush in. A few people were at the door and some were inside. When Li Yunxin and Lu Baishui entered the courtyard, the people in the courtyard looked at them. But it was completely dark now, and the candlelight in the house was very weak, so people couldn't see the people's faces clearly. So they turned their heads, shrank their necks, and continued to endure the biting cold wind. The two of them squeezed forward again, and someone finally saw Lu Baishui's face. His expression softened and he was about to say something. But Lu Baishui waved his hand and that person immediately stopped. After a while the people in the courtyard shrank back, making room for the two. Lu Baishui whispered in the night, "Let's go. Go back. Tomorrow go to the East Inn and get some rice." More than a dozen people in the courtyard immediately bowed to him and left quickly. Li Yunxin nodded slightly. Brother Lu is a real hero, not a tyrant. Lu Baishui shook his head. "Brother Li, you flatter me." They looked into the house together. In the main hall of the low house, there was a dim oil lamp and an incense table. The incense table was big and wide and no one knew where it came from. But there were several quilts on it, and Lisi was sitting cross-legged on the quilt. Lisi looked very strange. She was only wearing thin clothes, but her collar and sleeves were tightly bound. He was a very thin man, but he wore makeup. His face and hands were as white as a ghost, and there was a cloth bag on his head. There were several big red silk flowers on the bag and some other shiny things. It looked funny and nondescript. But now he closed his eyes, sat cross-legged on the incense table, and shook his head, mumbling something. A man stood under the table, slightly bent, and looked at him nervously, as if he was worried about something. But people in the town said that this is not a celestial spell. Lu Baishui and Li Yunxin watched for a while at the door and whispered, "Actually, I think so too. I've seen a Chuma immortal before. Do you know about it?" Li Yunxin said, "Yes, I've heard of it. It said that it's a monster that cultivates in the mountains and finds a fated person to be its disciple." Someone asked about divination, and the demon immortal possessed the disciple's body and used the disciple's mouth to determine good or bad luck. "Brother Lu, are you saying that he belongs to this category?" Lu Baishui nodded. "This Li Si is usually no different from ordinary people. At most he's a little confused because he came back from the sea. But when it comes to divination he's a different person. I think, what kind of demon immortal possessed him?" Speaking of this, he shook his head. "I asked my demon brother. My brother said that this is also common. Most of them are small demons and they don't do evil, they just want to earn some merit. I don't care. Do you believe this?" "Yes, it's true. There's nothing to believe or not," Li Yunxin said while looking at Li Si's body. This time he carefully used his demon power, wanting to see if it was the Chuma immortal that Lu Baishui mentioned. He did see it. There was a layer of black fog on Li Si's body. It had the shape of a person, but it could also be something else, a coincidence. There was indeed something attached to him. But what exactly was it, he couldn't see. Li Yunxin thought for a while and frowned. At this time, Li Si opened his eyes. His body shivered first, as if someone was holding his head and shaking it from top to bottom. Then he reached out his hand to touch the few big red silk flowers on his head, and then moved his eyes to the person in front of the table and said, "Ah, what are you asking?" "You're asking about your chicken? Who stole it?" Hee. I know, I'm Goddess Penglai of Mao Penglai. Do you know?" The person nodded hurriedly. I know. Li Yunxin let out a soft ha sound. Chapter 590. What a familiar tone. It reminded him of Mrs. Sanhua, but he knew it wasn't. A demon's aura was similar to a human's appearance, but there were slight differences. With his current cultivation he wouldn't make a mistake if he checked. But the problem was, it was very similar. The thing attached to Li Si's body spoke in a tone very similar to Mrs. Sanhua's. The aura of a demon was also very similar. He had never seen this kind of similarity on other demons. It was even smaller than the difference between Dragon Sun's aura. What on earth was this thing? Now he already knew that after he left the mountain village in Dingzhou, many things weren't purely coincidences. Some were certain and some were still questionable. But the appearance of Mrs. Sanhua? He felt that it was the former. She even appeared on Yunshan Mountain and displayed a shocking familiarity with the internal affairs of Yunshan. She was indeed hiding a secret, whether she did it intentionally or not. After the battle on Yunshan Mountain, Sanhua had disappeared, and now a similar thing had appeared here. Li Yunxin turned his face slightly and looked at Lu Baishui. But then he rejected this idea in his heart. He had already been with this person for many days. If he still couldn't see that this person might be hiding another identity, then he would be an idiot. Of course he wasn't, so that meant, maybe it was just a coincidence. This feeling made him unhappy. Coincidences meant variables that were out of his control. And in the past year there had been too many variables. He sighed lightly in his heart. Looking at the strange Li Si, he twisted his body again and said, If you know, why don't you offer up the 3 animals? The 3 animals? Where are the 3 animals? Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows again. Whether it was Sanhua or this thing, they both seemed to have an unusual obsession with the 3 animals. The 3 animals. In this world it referred to pigs, cows and sheep. In this aspect it was consistent with his previous world. These 3 kinds of sacrifices were also called the prison. They were the highest standard sacrifices in this world. Since ancient times, pigs were very important to the people of all the countries in this world. Moreover, they were listed among the highest standard of offerings, and had a certain sacred meaning. As far as Li Yunxin knew, in the kingdom of Qing, If someone said that this thing was dirty and disgusting, they would be sentenced to exile. After all, it was a sacred offering, so how could they allow others to defile it? Cows were large livestock used for farming in this era. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were strategic resources. As for sheep, it was a common meat on the dining table since ancient times, so it wasn't strange for it to be included. These three items were either sacrificed to the heavens, the earth, or the various supreme gods. The three flowers and this thing always said that it needed three animals. Li Yunxing frowned, thinking that this seemed to be a key point that he had neglected from the beginning to the end. Previously, he thought that Sanhua's words were just like how people in the secular world would say, "Now that I have money, I must do this and that." But looking at it now, there seemed to be an important inside story. The people in the room were similar to the people in the front yard. They didn't have money or knowledge. Originally, they just wanted to ask the great immortal to see why their chickens were always being stolen. It was said that Li Si, the great immortal, was not greedy, and his offerings were very small. If he didn't have money, he could send some vegetables and fish, or even stay and work for half a day. But now he suddenly asked for three animals. Where did he get such expensive things? For a moment he became nervous and said repeatedly, I don't know. Li Si suddenly laughed strangely. It was like a chicken being squeezed by the neck, squeezing out the air from its vocal cords. Hey, you know nothing. Where would you get them? Only the two outside have them. Ask them if they are willing to help you. As he spoke, he shook his body as if he really wanted to twist and turn. But his body was stiff, and he could only shake back and forth like a tree. That person hurriedly looked outside in a panic. With the dim light in the room, he saw Lu Baishui's face. Startled, he hurriedly said, "Lord Lu? I didn't know you were here. Please, please." After saying a few words in fear, he hurriedly leaned his body and rubbed his way out. Only Li Si was left in the room. Lu Baishui and Li Yunxing were standing outside looking in. One of the oil lamps in the room flickered, and the room became even darker. Only then did they realize one thing. Although the door of the room was open, and the cold wind of the winter night poured into the room, but the light of the oil lamp continued to shine, as if it was in a quiet room. When those who came to ask about good or bad luck saw this, even if they didn't believe it, they would immediately feel that it was extraordinary. But Lu Baishui had traveled far and wide and had seen many such things. He just smiled and walked into the room. Looking around, he saw two old chairs near the door. He lifted his clothes and sat on them. He raised his chin and said, "Master Li and I are looking for Li Si. Where is he? Tell him to come out." Li Yunxing followed him in. He turned his hand and closed the door. The cold wind outside the room was immediately isolated, and only a soft whine could be heard. Li Si saw that Li Yunxing also sat down, and he made a sound of surprise. He squinted at Lu Baishui and said in a soft voice, "Li Si?" "I am Li Si." Lu Baishui slapped the armrest of the chair and said in a deep voice, "You demon immortal. Don't be ungrateful. Do you know Taoish Chong from Surging Waves Mountain? Should I ask him to come and ask you?" Surging Waves Mountain was a small mountain more than 10 miles away from Whitewater Town. Taoish Chong from Surging Waves Mountain was the demon that Lu Baishui had a good relationship with. Not everyone knew his identity as a demon, but everyone knew his identity as Taoist Yudao. Li Si was infuriated when he heard this. He raised his eyebrows and stared at him. "Hey! How dare you?" Li Yunxing stretched out his hand and lightly knocked on the armrest. Li Si immediately stopped talking and widened his eyes. He looked at Lu Baishui and then at Li Yunxing as if he was uncertain about something. After hesitating for a while, he suddenly snorted and didn't say anything. Li Si shuddered, blinked his eyes quickly and looked at the two people in the room blankly. But the room was dim and it took him a while to see them clearly. He hurriedly said, Officer Lu." As he spoke, he rolled down from the incense table. But it seemed that he had been sitting for too long, and the cold wind had been blowing for too long. When he walked, he felt like a piece of hardwood, which was a hindrance to his hands and feet. He was afraid that the next moment he would fall to the ground. He had just walked 2 steps and was about to bow to Lu Baishui. Lu Baishui frowned and covered his nose. "Hey, go back. What's that smell?" Although he had traveled extensively and endured all kinds of hardships, he was not used to one thing. But there was one thing that she was not used to: she was afraid of smelly and salty things. Now that Li Si was in front of him, he could smell the fishy smell of salted fish from his body, almost choking him to tears. Li Si hurriedly stepped back and said, Officer Lu, I'm just a fisherman." Lu Baishui frowned and told him to step back further. No wonder you wanted to open the door. The smell on your body, you should wash it off. Li Si nodded and stepped back a few more steps. At this time Li Yunxin smiled and said, Brother Lu, you have wronged him. This smell is not something he can wash off. His tone was gentle, and Li Si hurriedly looked at him with gratitude. But then he heard Li Yunxin say, the smell of a corpse. How do you wash it off? Li Si's originally lifeless expression froze. Lu Baishui paused and suddenly jumped up from the chair. What did Brother Li say? Li Yunxin was still sitting on the chair and flicked his nails. Brother Lu, you know that my mother practiced Taoist books. After all, it is not a profound celestial art, so she taught me some. Although I don't have the ability of an immortal, I still know the principle of exorcism. So I took a look just now. This Li Si. He died long ago. After saying this, he looked up at Li Si. Tell me, am I right? Li Si stared at the two of them. His eyes slowly became fierce, and the fire in the room also flickered, casting their shadows on the wall as if evil demons were dancing. Seeing him like this, Li Yunxin sighed, it's useless to act fierce. A corpse may be soaked in the sea for a few days after it died, and then salted like salted fish. Then air-dried it and used some other methods to barely maintain a human appearance. It's fine to scare others, but it can't block my brother Lu's thunderous attack. I have some soul-calming talismans here, you won't get any benefits. The two of us are not here for anything else. Li Yunxin looked at the fierce Li Si. I just want to ask you how Li Si and the people on the boat died. As for the future, you can attach yourself to this zombie and absorb incense. As long as you don't harm people, no one will care. Lu Baishui looked at Li Yunxin and was a little surprised in his heart. His brother Li actually had these tricks. But then, like before, it turned into appreciation. It was because such an unfathomable person could always surprise people, not as boring as those who could be seen through at a glance. So he stared at Li Si a few times and also smiled coldly. Since Brother Li said so, it is also my intention. Whatever Master Li asks you, you will answer it. Otherwise, don't blame my pair of iron palms for being merciless. Li Si was silent for a while with a dull face, and then he laughed devilishly, no longer cowering like before. Humph? Ask me? I'm Goddess Peng Lai. Humph, how dare you? Do you know Goddess Peng Lai? Although she said so, she didn't run or move. It was because of the fear in her heart. When she was talking to Lu Baishui before, Li Yunxin flicked the armrest, showing a little momentum. But even so, it was like a dragon's scales, which made this Goddess Peng Lai aware that there was a master nearby that she couldn't compete with. At this time, she wasn't sure whether the master was in front of the two or outside the room, so she didn't dare to act rashly. Li Yunxin ignored her bluff. He just thought for a while and asked first, you call yourself Goddess Peng Lai, what is your real identity? The demon hesitated for a moment, as if she didn't know whether she should give in and answer his question. Finally she stared at him, Goddess Peng Lai, she is Goddess Peng Lai. Humph, she is the master of Mao Peng Lai, an immortal born between heaven and earth. Oh, how dare you! Lu Baishui frowned and was about to scold her. But Li Yunxin raised his hand, hey Brother Lu, don't be impatient. Humans are the soul of all creatures, why bother with this kind of demon? As he said this, he reached into his sleeve and pulled out something that looked like crumbs. It was about the size of half a fingernail. Look carefully. This is the dregs of Jinsui bolus. One piece is worth the power of incense and wishes you have collected for hundreds of years. You are smart, so it's yours. Lu Baishui didn't know what it was. But Goddess Peng Lai seemed to know it. Her eyes immediately widened and she seemed to be very interested. But because of this, she took a step back. Li Yunxin understood that this guy was actually very smart, although he seemed to be talking nonsense. Since he was able to casually take out something that this demon covets, his strength must be extraordinary. So although this demon was jealous, she also felt danger. It was like the instinct of a beast. In this aspect, she was very similar to the Three Flowers goddess. However, this person's words were more logical and clear than the Three Flowers ladies. Maybe because, if this person was really the master of Mao Peng Lai as she said, then she should have more incense and wishes than the master of Mrs. Sanhua Temple. Demons were all muddle-headed at first. The higher one's cultivation, the clearer one's mind would be. That was probably why she looked like this. Although he didn't know why she ended up here. Lu Baishui saw that Li Yunxin didn't panic in the face of this demon, and he responded calmly and firmly held the initiative, so he couldn't help but admire him more. In the world, there were not many people who could talk and laugh with emperors, kings and generals in white, but certainly not few. But it was extremely rare to see someone like Li Yunxin who could chat and laugh with a demon. How could he not be happy to make friends with such a wonderful person? Goddess Penglai rolled her turbid eyes and touched the big flower on her head. She seemed to think for a while and then said, Ask me, ask me. Li Yunxin thought for a while and asked again, Do you know a person named Mrs. Sanhua? The demon immediately said, I don't know. Li Yunxin responded, So, have you seen a person named Shangguanyu? The demon didn't even think, no. Judging from her attitude, it seemed that she had made up her mind not to say anything. Lu Baishui frowned, but Li Yunxin was still not in a hurry. Then tell me how you met this Li Si? The demon rolled her eyes again. He was washed by the waves into this goddess's immortal mountain, and saw this goddess's immortal palace. He asked me to save him. But he was half dead at that time. How could I save him? I just freed him. Goddess Penglai said this in a low voice and then laughed. The rest, alas, were not so lucky. They must have been eaten by the traitor. Li Yunxin turned the dregs in his fingers and calmly asked, Who is the traitor? Hearing this question, the demon immediately stared at him. Traitor? Bah! I don't want to mention his name. Oh, that traitor will die a horrible death. He must be killed by that woman. Which woman? The demon stopped talking. Greedily looking at the dregs in Li Yunxin's hand, she blinked. Give me this first. Chapter 591. Li Yunxin took out the scroll from his sleeve and unfolded it. Is it this woman? Goddess Penglai glanced at it and nodded. Yes. Li Yunxin replied with an oh. Is she very, very tall, even taller than me? Her face is black and her eyes are red? The demon nodded again. Yes. Lu Baishui frowned and shouted, How dare you? Li Yunxin raised his hand to stop him and looked at the demon. Last chance. Staring at the dregs in his hand, Goddess Penglai suddenly jumped up and threw herself at Li Yunxin. Give it to me. When Goddess Penglai saw the dregs in Li Yunxin's hand, she took a step back vigilantly. But now, after 10 minutes, she suddenly changed her attitude. It seemed that she had lost her mind because of her strong desire. She overestimated herself and tried to snatch the dregs. Li Yunxin wasn't surprised by this. Demons? They couldn't be judged by human reason. If a cute puppy wagged its tail at its owner and growled at a passerby, would it be strange? Demons were the same. Compared with human beings, demons changed their emotions faster. Maybe it was because of their beastly nature. But this goddess Penglai. Li Yunxin realized that she seemed to have lost her mind because of the rebellion she mentioned. This demon must hate the so-called rebellion to the bone, or at least it left a deep impression on her. She lost her composure when she mentioned it. But how could she snatch it? With her current cultivation she was already at the emptiness realm. But in front of Li Yunxin she was like an ant. Before Lu Baishui made a move, Li Yunxin had struck with his palm. There was a trace of demonic power in his powerful palm. Lu Baishui didn't notice it, but the demon's expression changed. She knew that the power was so violent that she couldn't compete with it. His body, which had been pouncing forward like a wooden stake, swayed and fell straight to the ground. Her real body turned into a black fog and went straight for the crack in the door. Li Yunxin did not get up either. He lightly stomped his foot on the ground. All the cracks in the room immediately emitted a golden light invisible to the naked eye, forcing the black fog back. At this time, mortals could freely enter and exit the house, but for the demons, it had become an airtight cage. This goddess of Penglai did not believe it and jumped left and right for a while. When she had no other choice, she attached herself to the body of Li Si's zombie. She bounced up from the ground and stared at Li Yunxin viciously. Hey! It's not like I'm the one who destroyed your mother's boat. Ayaya, why are you looking for me? Hearing this, Lu Baishui and Li Yunxin looked at each other. Li Yunxin frowned. So you've met her? He shouted again. Speak. Otherwise don't blame me for not showing mercy. How do you know she is my mother? That goddess of Penglai could not escape, nor could she beat him. She took 3 steps back and widened her eyes. That woman carries a painting with her. She takes it out every day to look at it. She cries while looking at it. She mutters that it's her son. Isn't he exactly the same as you? Li Yunxin was stunned and sat on the chair. In Lu Baishui's eyes, Li Yunxin had always been calm. Even when he found out that the so-called god Li Si was a zombie and possessed by a demon, he did not panic. But at this time he saw him in a daze. All kinds of feelings welled up in his heart. He realized that Brother Li was also a sentimental person. Although he was free and easy, he did not forget the righteousness and filial piety. It was really admirable. Therefore he shouted for him, "Tell us in detail. Tell us everything and we won't make things difficult for you." He did not know what the demon was thinking at this time. Maybe it knew it could not do anything and was afraid. Or it had other thoughts. In the end, it rolled its eyes and said in a shrill voice, "What does it have to do with me? I was sitting in the temple when the boat suddenly crashed into me. That woman was unreasonable. She almost destroyed my temple and said I was making trouble. It was all because of the rebellious wind, the trouble. She stayed on my spirit mountain for a few days again. Asking questions here and there, asking questions here and there. Just like you now. On this Empress's immortal mountain." At this time, Li Yunxin came back to his senses. Listening to the demon's 3 sentences, he noticed some details. The woman mentioned by goddess of Penglai should be Shangguanyu. She also said "a few days," and asked all kinds of questions with resentment. It could be seen that Shangguanyu's body was fine at that time and she could even control goddess of Penglai. He was a little relieved in his heart. He heaved a sigh of relief, but it was as if he had opened up a bag in his body. Suddenly, a lot of different feelings gushed out. This feeling seemed to have been fermented for many years, making him feel a little sour in his heart. After all, it was a strange and fearful feeling. So he frowned and didn't think about it for the time being. "Go on. We didn't come to you for revenge." Although the temperament of demons was hard to understand, their thoughts were not complicated. Listening to goddess of Penglai say so much, how could he not know that she hated that rebellious to the bone? So he pushed the boat with the current. "If you didn't do anything bad, and my mother's boat was really capsized by that rebellious guy as you said, we still have to help you get justice." It seemed that he was right on goddess of Penglai's mind. She widened her eyes and shouted, "Are you serious? Let me tell you what good things that rebellious guy did. When your mother came to my spirit mountain, she asked all kinds of questions. She said she wanted to go to the Dragon Island. She lost her mind. It was spring, how could she go to the Dragon Island? I drifted on the sea for more than 10 years. I didn't even see the Dragon Island. Humph. Later she didn't believe me and insisted on asking that rebellious guy. That rebellious guy hadn't seen anyone for many years. Of course he liked to eat people. He caught all the living ones and ate them. Your mother. Oh, she fought with him." Li Yunxin leaned forward slightly. "Then?" Goddess of Penglai blinked. "Then? I attached myself to the body of this dead guy and ran away." Li Yunxin and Lu Baishui looked at each other and then at her. "Why did you run away?" Goddess of Penglai glared at him. "Because I asked her to fight with that rebellious guy." Li Yunxin was silent for a while and asked her, "What is this rebellious guy you always talk about?" This time, it was the demon's turn to be silent. After a long silence, just when Li Yunxin thought she had used some unknown method to escape, she opened her mouth, her voice full of obvious viciousness and hatred. "That rebellious guy. It's that damn Dragon King of the Eastern Sea." Li Yunxin frowned. Dragon King? Chapter 592. But at the moment, the demon seemed to have fallen into a deep hatred and anger. It just stood there, gnashing its teeth and murmuring something. Lu Baishui leaned towards him and said, "Brother Li, you just arrived in the East Sea country, so it's normal that you don't know about this. The legend of the East Sea Dragon King has been around for a long time. It's said that although Shinryu is a spirit creature saint, they still need to be managed on the sea. Therefore they infect a few dragon son as Dragon King. The East Sea Dragon King is the 9th son." Li Yunxin thought for a while, then asked, "Brother Lu, according to what you said, the legend of the East Sea country is interesting. There are some legends in the Central Plains too. Brother Lu, you're a knowledgeable man, you should have heard about them. They say that Shinryu did infect 9 sons. But the one that controls 70% of the water in the world." Lu Baishui smilingly shook his head. He seemed to be in a good mood, knowing that Li Yunxin's mother was still alive. He said in a low voice, "Brother Li, you're talking about the Dragon King of the land. The ones in the coastal area are the Dragon King of the sea. The Midland is vast. It's normal that there are different legends. We often have visitors from the inland. In fact, there are also legends about the Dragon King of the land. But according to the legends in the coastal area, the Dragon King of the land only controls a small amount of water, so it doesn't belong to Shinryu. It's the inferior Dragon Son. The real Dragon King and Dragon Son are the ones in the sea. Speaking of this, he shook his head and waved his hand. To be honest, I believe in demons, ghosts, and immortals. But these Dragon King and Dragon Son, I don't believe in them. I think they're all made up. The East Sea Dragon King she mentioned. Maybe it's a monster's name. He paused for a second, his eyes sparkling in the dim light. Then he hesitated and lowered his voice. But Brother Li, your mother and you? Who are you? He had thought that Li Yunxin was a gentle and courteous hero. Perhaps he was the kind of young master who was born in a wealthy official's family and didn't have to worry about food and drink, so he hired a brilliant teacher to teach him. Only when he left the mountain and roamed the Jianghu would he have such an appearance. But later she heard from him that his family was in trouble and his parents were separated. His mother had cultivated in the Taoist scriptures, but her whereabouts were unknown. Thus, he felt that she might be from a noble family of the pugilistic world. He had roamed the Jianghu for many years, and was once an outstanding disciple of an elder of the western region's flame cult. He had also made acquaintance with some Jianghu's first and second-rate experts, such as Golden Blade Zhang Daxia, Black Blading Daxia, Piercing Cloud Thunderbolt Han Du Xinyang, Keijian Lu Kong Kong, and so on. But now he was thinking hard about which aristocratic family had done such a thing, but he just couldn't figure it out. The person in front of him, Li Yunxin, was definitely not a nobody in Jianghu, but he just didn't know. So, what kind of person was he? At this moment he heard this demon mention the East Sea Dragon King. The demon in front of him was real. The so-called East Sea Dragon King she mentioned, even if it was another demon in disguise, should be a character that normal people would find difficult to deal with. But this Brother Li's mother could actually fight evenly with the East Sea Dragon King. At this moment, Lu Baishui didn't dare to think too deeply about Li Yunxin's background. Hearing this, Li Yunxin thought for a moment and said in a low voice, I was born in the Qin Kingdom, and I am a citizen of the Qin Kingdom. He thought for a moment and said, I have never been a bandit, nor have I taken bribes, nor am I a heretic. Lu Baishui quietly said, oh, and didn't ask any more. He was a Jianghu person, so he naturally understood human feelings. He knew that Brother Li had answered him like this because there was something he couldn't say. But in the end he still told himself that he was not a bad person, so there was no need to worry. It wasn't the first time he had encountered this kind of situation, so it was understandable. But there was still a lingering curiosity in his heart. It was as if he had returned to his youth, when he first entered the Jianghu. Facing the mysterious treasure cave on the cliff, curiosity and excitement rose. Even though he knew that going forward could lead to unpredictable dangers, he also knew that there could be new discoveries. This kind of feeling had not appeared in a long time as his martial arts improved and his wealth increased. Now he experienced it again. After Li Yunxin said these words, he turned his head to look at the demon again and asked in a low voice, let me ask you, what does the East Sea Dragon King look like? At this time the demon rolled her eyes again. It seemed that she had vented some of her anger by being alone just now. At this time she came back to her senses and said, oh, what do you want to know? Are you really going to find that woman? Oh, I'm not telling you. She seemed to have thought of a wonderful idea and almost jumped up from the ground in joy. I'm not telling you. Go find her yourself. Go find her. Take me with you. I'll tell you when we get there. Help me kill that traitor. This demon sure is a bit of a smart one. Although she looked similar to Mrs. Sanhua, as if she was delirious because of the damage to her soul or something else, she still retained some consciousness and thought patterns left behind in her mind. Therefore it became like this, look at Li Yunxin's extraordinary moves. She wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife and asked him to go out to the sea to kill that traitor. But a really smart person wouldn't have said that. She had said it in a daze. But it was exactly what Li Yunxin wanted. He originally wanted to find a way to sneak into the vicinity of the Dragon Island and find out the situation. But now he knew that there were some spirit mountains, and that the Nine-Dragon Sun was on the Spirit Mountains. It seemed that the vast sea was not as cold as it looked. There was another world and a complicated pattern. He was not afraid of the complicated pattern, but he was afraid of the word clueless. This goddess Penglai was so narrow-minded. He didn't care what she wanted to lead him to do. As long as he could get some information and hide his tracks, he would do it even if she didn't ask him. Not to mention, Sheng Guanyu was here. He wanted to figure out some things and some feelings. No matter what, he wanted a definite result. There was enough fog. This was the last thing he wanted. Just then, a loud noise was heard from outside the house. Then, the sound of gravel hitting the door made the lintel tremble, and a large amount of dust fell from the beam. Lu Baishui's face changed and he stood up suddenly. But Li Yunxin just frowned and then relaxed. An acquaintance. He stood up and looked at Goddess Penglai. So, you want me to take you to your Penglai spirit mountain? The demon rolled her eyes and nodded. Li Yunxin smiled faintly. Okay. I'll take you there in a few days. Well, why don't I take you now? After saying this, before Lu Baishui and the demon could figure out what he meant, he suddenly reached out and took out a talisman from his sleeve. He turned his finger again, and the talisman shot out like lightning, sticking to Li Si's forehead. The zombie froze completely. It swayed on the spot and fell to the ground with a thud. But the talisman floated up and returned to Li Yunxin's palm like a bird. What a beautiful move. Lu Baishui couldn't help cheering, and then he realized it was a Taoist magic art. As expected, this brother Li of his wasn't a simple martial artist. Li Yunxin folded the talisman into a small triangle and put it away. He looked at Lu Baishui, seeming to be in a dilemma. Brother Lu, there are some people outside, they are my acquaintances. Lu Baishui's face darkened. Enemies? Li Yunxin shook his head with a wry smile. Enemies? He is my distant cousin. He insisted on coming out with me as I said before. So he found a capable follower to follow him. Now he should be coming for me. In a while, Brother Lu. I hope you'll forgive me for my sake. Li Yunxin rarely spoke in such a tone. Lu Baishui was slightly surprised. Then he realized that Li Si might be an arrogant young master. He came from a mysterious family living in seclusion in the mountains, so he was arrogant. He had seen many people like this, so he didn't care. Besides, he was more and more curious about Li Yunxin's background, and he was willing to take this opportunity to find some clues from his distant cousin. So he smiled. I've seen so many miraculous things today, so there's nothing to hide. Brother Li, please. After saying this, he didn't look at Li Si's zombie on the ground. Instead, he exerted his palm force and blasted open the door through the air. A gust of cold wind rushed into the courtyard, and the two of them saw the scene in the courtyard. Li Si's yard was surrounded by a low wall. And the low wall was built with stones and smeared with yellow mud. Looking at it now, there was a big hole in the wall on the east side of the yard, and the rest of the wall had fallen. The stone that struck the door just now should have been sent flying by the impact. In the yard, there were two people. One was a young man in white. In Lu Baishui's eyes, he was even more handsome than Brother Li. If Li Yunxin's appearance was the best in the world, then this young man must have the appearance of a celestial being. He must be Brother Li's distant cousin. And this cousin was grabbing the follower in his hand. The follower's clothes were a bit exotic. He wore a green robe decorated with colorful embroidery. It looked like the feathers of a big rooster were pulled off and woven into his clothes. He didn't look very pretty. He had a sharp mouth but not monkey-like cheeks. But his eyes were bright and full of expression. Looking at the two, it seemed that this cousin was grabbing the follower's collar and was about to hit him. But Lu Baishui knew at a glance that it was not a play of a villain bullying a servant. Because the follower also looked like he was about to fight back. When he took a closer look, he gasped in astonishment. This Brother Li by his side was unfathomable, and looking at his follower, he was actually a top-notch expert. In this shock, Li Yunxin had already stepped out of the door and sighed, "What are you doing?" The ninth young master looked at Li Yunxin and then at Pheasant. He angrily let go of Shanji and pushed him away, pointing at him. "You better remember this. You lost this time. I'm better than you in martial arts." Pheasant said, "I let you take a step back, otherwise I would have hit the house. Next time we compete, your palm technique is not as good as mine." After saying this, he winked at Li Yunxin. So he knew that Pheasant did a good job this time. Before he and the ninth young master set off, Li Yunxin told them something. For example, he told the ninth young master, "Now that the world is in turmoil and your state is not stable, you'd better keep a low profile and pretend to be an ordinary person. You can go sightseeing along the way. How wonderful it is." If he had said this to the ninth young master, he might have thought it was bullsh*t. But now it was different. He had died once and was almost swallowed once, so he finally knew how to be afraid of death. And he knew that although Li Yunxin seemed to be smiling, his means were more vicious than anyone he knew. It left a shadow in his heart. Besides, he didn't hate the prosperity of the human world, so he agreed casually. He also agreed to call himself Li Yunxin's cousin out of respect. In fact, in the eyes of Dragon's Son, the latter was like asking a child to play a doctor or a soldier. He was happy and interested. He wrote a few stories for Pheasant. He asked Pheasant to tell the ninth young master the steps of the stories he wrote along the way. The protagonists of the stories he wrote were mostly heroes in Jianghu. When the two of them walked along the road, Pheasant would listen to Li Yunxin's instructions and tell stories to the ninth young master every time they came across a place with magnificent scenery. No wonder they were stories of great heroes, getting to know each other without fighting, and of gratitude and hatred with a smile. In Li Yunxin's eyes, it might be tacky and old-fashioned, but in the eyes of others, it was sincere and interesting. He asked the ninth young master to listen to this road because he wanted to be a little more secure. Who in the world was better than a young man who had just gained a new life and was full of expectations for the world? So far, the ninth young master didn't make any big trouble along the way, and he got along well with Pheasant. Li Yunxin nodded slightly to him. Then he looked into the distance. "Where's Miss Bai?" Pheasant tidied up his robe and said respectfully, "Young master, I met Miss Bai on the way." On the way he met Miss Bai. After walking together for 2 days, they suddenly parted ways in a hurry. She said something big happened at home and had to go back to take care of it. She didn't say anything else. Miss Bai referred to Bai Yunxin. This Bai Yunxin was originally asked by the evil lord to walk with him. But, something big happened at home? Li Yunxin had a vague idea. But he didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse. At this time Lu Baishui also walked out. He cupped his hands to the ninth young master and said with a smile, "Young hero, you are good at martial arts. How should I address you?" Hearing this, the ninth young master tilted his head slightly and looked at him. But he didn't say anything, he just looked curious. Ever since he became famous, Lu Baishui had never encountered such a situation. He greeted someone first but someone didn't listen to him. So after 2 breaths, he slowly put down his hands and his face gradually turned cold. Suddenly, the ninth young master said, "Aren't you cold?" Lu Baishui was stunned. Then he looked at Li Yunxin's cousin carefully and finally found some clues. This person seemed to be a little childish. In the martial arts world, it was a decent way to describe a person as mentally retarded. But according to Lu Baishui's experience, this person belonged to the kind of people who were extremely talented in martial arts but behaved like a child. Thus, he felt relieved in his heart, but at the same time he felt a little ashamed of his anger just now. Before he left, this brotherly had reminded him. Since that was the case, his unhappiness turned into love. He smiled and said, "I'm used to walking in the snow. It's not cold." The ninth young master stared at him for a while. It was only when Li Yunxin coughed softly that she laughed, revealing 2 rows of snow-white teeth. "This person is interesting." After saying this, he walked 2 steps forward, still staring at Lu Baishui. His bright red tongue flashed by his lips and disappeared. "He is much more interesting than the others on the road." Hearing this, Lu Baishui laughed. "Brother Li, your cousin is also an interesting person." But Li Yunxin also laughed. He looked at the ninth young master and coughed again. He said in a low voice, "Cousin, this is my friend." Chapter 593. Lu Baishui could hear his tone. There was a hint of seriousness in his solemn tone. Therefore he thought that perhaps this brother Li saw that his distant cousin did not have much respect for him, and that his attitude was also rude, so he solemnly reminded him. He hurriedly said, "Hey brother Li. Your younger brother has the heart of a newborn baby, innocent and unaffected. That's something we can't learn. I like his enthusiasm. A young man should be like this." Then he looked at the ninth young master. "What's your name?" When he said this, he really talked to a young man. The ninth young master stared at Lu Baishui for a while and then muttered, Friend? He turned to look at Li Yunxin angrily. "Interesting people are your friends. You have so many friends." After saying this, he stomped away in a fit of pique. Lu Baishui was baffled by his sudden temper. But Pheasant and Li Yunxin were relieved at the same time. Master Lu, the hero of Stormy Wave's Path of Donghai Country, didn't know that his life was walking on a tightrope just now. Li Yunxin sighed, "Brother Lu, my younger brother is rude and I don't discipline him well." Lu Baishui laughed and waved his hand. I know. An elder brother is like a father. You should have a headache. But your cousin is an outstanding talent, and he also has a hard time. It doesn't matter." When he said this, he saw Pheasant was a little anxious beside Li Yunxin. He was clear. He knew that this attendant should have something to say to Li Yunxin. So he laughed knowingly. "Okay. You haven't seen each other for a long time, so I won't disturb you. I'll go back and prepare some food for you. Brother Li, see you later." Li Yunxin smiled. "Thank you, Brother Lu." Lu Baishui stretched his limbs and jumped onto the roof, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Li Yunxin turned to look at Pheasant. "What's wrong?" The chicken spirit said in a low voice, "Great King, "Ah, young master, we met a strange person on the way. I thought I should tell young master about this." Thinking about what Lu Baishui and goddess Penglai said about the Dragon King of the East Sea and the Dragon Son of the Sea, Li Yunxin answered, "Yes. Speak." "That's right. 3 days ago a strange person came to us. I don't know what kind of strange person he is. But the way he spoke and acted was strange. When you see him, ask if he's Wei River Dragon King." Pheasant said while looking at Li Yunxin's face, "The ninth young master. Although he didn't cause any trouble along the way, it wasn't very peaceful. I didn't watch them. I ate a few people. I was thinking that perhaps because of this, my identity was exposed." Then I said, "The ninth young master overheard him." The demon walked over and pushed the pheasant aside. "Go, go, go. I don't need you to tell me what to do." He was quite proud when he said this. He seemed to be satisfied with what he had done 3 days ago. Then he said to Li Yunxin, "Humph, I'll say it myself. That person haha is also interesting. His name is Xie Xing." Li Yunxin's ears suddenly stood up and he came to his senses. "Xie Xing? What does he look like?" The ninth young master said indifferently, "Humans all look the same. They are ugly with 2 eyes and 1 mouth. How many beautiful ones are there?" Li Yunxin looked at Pheasant. "Is he shorter than me, dark face, thin eyebrows?" Speaking of this, he found that Pheasant seemed to be confused. Then he remembered that many demons indeed couldn't see much difference when they looked at people. It was like people looking at cats, monkeys, cows and sheep. If there was no difference in fur color, they looked the same at first glance. So he put his fingers together and sketched a figure in the air. "Is it this person?" The ninth young master glanced at it. "Yes, I think so." Pheasant nodded. "Young master, it's this person." Li Yunxin replied with a "Ninth young master, please tell me in detail." This Xie Xing they met was the real prince who had run away from Li Chunfeng. He thought this guy would come to him, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Hearing his tone, the ninth young master knew that this matter must be important to Li Yunxin. But then he raised his eyebrows and stared at him. "Is he your friend again?" Li Yunxin shook his head. "No, he's not a friend." The demon said with an "Oh. Ah, that's easy. Ah, he's an idiot." According to the ninth young master, it didn't happen 3 days ago. In fact, it should be 7 days ago. 7 days ago they passed by a small village near Sima town. The village was small with only a dozen families. It was here that the ninth young master, the demon, became greedy. When Pheasant wasn't paying attention, he killed and ate a man, in public in front of dozens of people in the village. Pheasant used Li Yunxin to pressure him. But the ninth young master wasn't a vegetarian. With blood in his mouth, he stubbornly said, "What's the big deal about eating meat? I'm the son of Wei River Dragon King Shinryu, and Shinryu came to praise me at the foot of Yunshan." Maybe because he had been the Wei River Dragon King for 1,000 years, he said this name smoothly. Since he said it, he wouldn't change it. What could Pheasant do to him? He could only try his best to coax him away before he became violent and killed more people. As for the people in the village, he didn't kill them. Because nowadays, it wasn't news for demons to eat people. Even if it was spread out, few people would believe it. Because it was possible for demons to eat humans. But if one counted carefully, for example, if there were 10 cases of demons eating people in the city of Wei in a year, at least 9 of them were false. It wasn't demons who ate people but people who killed people and then lied about being demons eating people. It was an absurd excuse. If the government couldn't solve the case, they could use it as an excuse to announce that it was indeed demons eating people. But people weren't all fools. As time went by, he gradually stopped believing in the government and also stopped believing in the existence of demons. Now, when someone said that people were eaten, the first thing they thought of was that the government couldn't solve the murder case and was perfunctory. In addition, there were many beasts in the mountains in this era. It was not uncommon for beasts to attack people in villages and towns. Some people said that people who were killed by beasts were eaten by demons. Pheasant thought that if the 2 of them left, no one would believe it even if dozens of people told others about it. Who would care about a cheap life in the mountains and villages? Unexpectedly, among the dozens of villagers that day, there was a foreigner, Xie Sheng. Hearing this, Li Yunxin frowned. He thought, how could it be so coincidental? But after thinking about it, he couldn't think of any other explanation except coincidence. But on the other hand, it wasn't strange for a real prince with a protagonist's destiny to encounter such a coincidence. After all, he could find a secret book of martial arts even if he fell off a cliff. Xie Sheng had taken ninth young master's words to heart. Then he followed him for 4 days and observed secretly. When he first entered the world, he thought he had made rapid progress in cultivation and had great magical power. But he didn't know how clever the demons in the world were compared to him. No matter how well he hid his tracks, how could the ninth young master not find out? Fortunately, the demon had already satisfied his appetite. It was rare to find a person dared to follow him, so he had fun. Along the way he deliberately talked about the things between him and Shinryu, and many details of his life in the Wei River. No one knew who he was showing off to. But Xiexing must have seen and heard it. Combined with what he had seen and heard on the way, he seemed to realize that this was indeed the Wei River Dragon King, who had existed for 1,000 years. So 4 days later, 3 days ago, Xiexing found the ninth young master. He suddenly came in through the window. When he landed, he asked me, "Are you the Wei River Dragon King?" The ninth young master stared at Xiexing and imitated him. He couldn't tell the Qing people apart, but he imitated them very well. From this, Li Yunxing could imagine Xiexing's expression at that time. It was a cautious but firm expression. Maybe there were some other meanings. For example, some kind of heroic spirit caused by courage. I asked him, "Who are you?" The ninth young master took a step back and distinguished the two people he described, as if he was enjoying it. He just said a lot of nonsense. Things like guiding people, protecting little demons, plans, and so on. I felt dizzy. Hey, I thought he was annoying, so I waved my hand and sent him out. Li Yunxin slightly frowned and glanced at Pheasant. Pheasant immediately said, "Then I followed him." The ninth young master was surprised. "What? Why didn't I know?" Pheasant muttered a few words to fool him and said to Li Yunxin, "That person fought with me for a while, and it was a draw. But I pretended to lose to him. Why did you follow him?" Li Yunxin suddenly asked. He looked a little curious. Pheasant said, "I saw him following me for so long, and he was interested in the name of the king, so I paid attention to him." "Well, go on." "I didn't think he would kill me. Sure enough, he just asked me some things. I thought about it and felt that everything he asked had other intentions. But I was not as smart as the king, so I couldn't figure it out." Pheasant sighed, but I could see that no matter what I said, he didn't believe me. At this time, Li Yunxin was more sure that it was the Xiexing he met. Xiexing was smart, but he didn't know much. He didn't trust people easily, and he had strong confidence in himself. When he talked with Li Yunxin in the mountain, he was sure that the organization he was looking for was the Little Demon Protector. Now he met him by chance and followed him all the way, probably to confirm his conjecture. Fortunately, the ninth young master, who used to be the real Wei River Dragon King but was now a fake, helped Li Yunxin unintentionally. The Wei River Dragon King he met on the way must be different from what he imagined. If it was an ordinary person, he might think, it's not. But smart people like him and Li Yunxin always took a roundabout way. For example, was it a deliberate act? Otherwise, how could the Wei River Dragon King, who made the Little Demon Protector, drive him out without hesitation after hearing the word guide? So I followed his words and wanted to know what he wanted to ask. "I wanted to know what he was going to ask," said the Pheasant slowly. "But the man was too clever. I couldn't see the flaw. Except for the king, I have never seen such a smart person." Speaking of this, Li Yunxin asked another irrelevant question. "Your real body is a rooster. What about before you transformed into a human?" He had seen a lot of demons in his life. But even some great demon kings in the real state might not be as smart as Pheasant. While it was true that he, the king, had taught them well, there should be other factors as well. Pheasant was a little stunned and said, "Before I transformed into a human, I was a timekeeper in the mountain watching school of the Lu family in the city of Wei for many years." Li Yunxin smiled. "No wonder. Go on." Pheasant blinked. Finally he asked where we were going. I said we were going to the Dragon Island. Then that person left. Maybe he realized he was exposed, so he didn't follow us all the way. Li Yunxin frowned slightly and thought for a while. He looked up and asked, "So where do you think he would go after he left?" Pheasant was stunned again, and a trace of fear finally appeared on his face. He didn't follow Li Yunxin for a long time, but it wasn't short either. So he often saw his king and Lu Gongzan discussing some things. Occasionally his king would ask Lao Dao's opinion. But as for the demon generals under his command, he didn't give them any face, but mostly ordered them around. He didn't have any opinion on this. Compared to other demons who killed their demon soldiers and demon generals, and even compared to the strict teachers in the mountain watching school, Li Yunxin actually treated them very well. But now that they had parted ways and met Li Yunxin again, he found that he had changed slightly. He couldn't tell what had changed, and even his words were still as simple as before. But Pheasant felt that he was finally included in the king's sight, instead of being an emotionless puppet in the background. Now he even asked himself what he thought would be. He was frightened by this sudden attention. It took him 2 breaths to calm down, and then he hurriedly said, I think, he will also want to go to the Dragon Island to see what's going on. Maybe Li Yunxin didn't notice the demon general's emotion. Maybe he noticed it but he didn't show it. He thought for a while and then said, I think so too. If he really did that, I guess I'll have a rough understanding of this person's temper. His affirmation made Pheasant blink his eyes quickly, and straightened his body. At this time, the 9th young master had already entered the room and looked through everything in the room. Except for the zombie on the ground, he was not interested in anything else. So he turned around. Cousin Li. It's so boring here, when are you going to stop talking? Li Yunxin turned to look at him and smiled. 9th young master, just bear with it for a few days. After a few days, when we are ready, it is said that there are still Dragon King and Dragon Son in the East Sea. They even said that we are inferior, don't they? 9th young master, do you want to go and have a look? The 9th young master immediately opened his eyes wide and raised his eyebrows. What? Who dares to say such a thing? But halfway through his anger he stopped. What kind of things are they? Li Yunxin laughed again. They should be some stupid demons that don't make the cut. They have never seen the world in the barbarian land, that's why they say so. The 9th young master regained his anger. Hey! Then let's go to the sea and teach them a lesson. I'll wait, you better get ready quickly. Chapter 594. It took him 5 days to prepare. For the 9th young master of the Lord Tongtian, these 5 days were really hard to bear. He used to be weak, so he could only hide in a section of Weishui River near Dongting. The Lord of Dongting was powerful and resourceful, so he didn't dare to make trouble around the Lord Dongting. But he didn't have a good life around him either. Evil King of the Pitfall Mountain was also in the mysterious realm. Bai Yunxin, who was in the realm of truth, always came to scare him. People always joked with each other because they knew that rational people wouldn't suddenly kill people. But for the fiendish demons, who knew if they would really become fierce when they were still smiling in the past? He was scared by the monster Bai Yunxin again. It was okay if he was a lowly wild monster, but he was Dragon's son. To be fair, no human or monster in the world was more wrong than him. Then he experienced many things, and in the end, bitterness is over. Li Yunxin created such a body at the peak of the realm of truth with the help of painting Taoism and something else. With this body he didn't have to live like before. 1,000 years of grievances were gone now. How was it compared with the disaster of being killed? In fact, this was also one of the reasons why the fiendish demon had quickly forgotten about Li Yunxin. As the saying goes, a smile dissolves all enmity. Otherwise, why would the 9th young master say to Li Yunxin when he met him outside the burning city of Wei, "Don't disgrace the name of the Lord of Weishui River"? Because of this, the 9th young master was like a duck out of its nest. Shinryu came to support him, and with the terrible Li Yunxin, no one dared to provoke him. Those who hadn't played before wanted to have fun, and those who hadn't eaten before wanted to eat to their heart's content. The prosperous world was vast and everyone wanted to see it. But now, staying by Li Yunxin's side in the East Sean was really painful. He couldn't do anything and Li Yunxin didn't allow him to eat people. It was like returning to a cage. Therefore he looked forward to it day and night, wanting nothing more than to go to sea as soon as possible. But it all depended on Liu Baishui. This stormy wave road tycoon had quite a few businesses under his name, but he had never been involved in the fishing industry before. Although he had plans to go overseas to explore, it was already winter. He had planned to wait until spring to prepare for this matter. Who would have thought that they would run into Li Yunxin? And so they made their move at this time. There were many boats in Whitewater Town, but they were all small and medium-sized. They could walk in the coastal waters, but they couldn't withstand the winds and waves of the ocean. But Liu Baishui had a wide circle of friends, so he got lucky. In the past, his relationship with the local government was not bad, but it was not harmonious either. Over the past year, because of some business matters, he had become acquainted with the Supreme Judge Xie Sun of the Stormy Waves Road, and could be considered to have some friends in the government. As a result, he managed to obtain 2 three-masted three-fang warships. 3 masts referred to the 3 main masts, and 3 fangs referred to the 3 floors of the ship. It was nearly 100 meters long and required nearly 200 sailors to accompany it. This kind of thing would not be easily obtained by the common people. Even if one had a mountain of gold and silver, it would be difficult to buy it. But these two warships were not obtained by the proper way. In the area of Aquarius Bay in the East Sea, there had always been a pirate fleet, which was quite powerful. The pirate leader's surname was Lu Fei, and he called himself the Sea King. It was said that he used to be a rich and powerful family in the Central Plains, but because of an accident in his family, he escaped to the sea and gathered a group of pirates. This group of pirates was not ordinary. There were 5 or 6 such three-masted three-fang warships and dozens of small boats. The bow of the ship was equipped with an angle of attack, and when they encountered a merchant ship, they would rush over and then board the ship. It was extremely fierce. The East Sea Navy had sent troops to encircle and annihilate them 3 times, but they lost 2 times and won 1 time. They had never found the main force of the pirates. But in this spring there was an unforeseen event. Somehow there was an internal strife among the pirates. One of the leaders brought these 2 warships and more than 300 people to surrender to the government. He said that he could also offer the sea map of Aquarius Bay, so that the government could capture the Sea King Lu Fei. The government temporarily detained these 2 warships, and the leaders who would surrender to the government also treated them well. But for some unknown reason, these leaders were suddenly beheaded. More than 300 pirates were also hanged. It was said that they did not come to surrender. Instead, they planned to pretend to surrender, and then cooperate with the Sea King Lu Fei to capture the Stormy Waves Road. This matter had been going on for quite some time. It gradually calmed down at the end of autumn. But the warships of the East Sea Navy were 5-fang big wings, and the shape was different from the ships of the pirates, so they did not want to accept them. The coastal people who could afford these 2 warships were not willing to be involved in bad luck. It must be known that Lu Fei was extremely arrogant. Some ignorant people bought his ships to run shipping on the sea. What would happen if they were seen? Thus it became a hot potato. Everyone wanted it, but no one dared to. Until Lu Baishui thought of this, he spent 16,000 taels of silver to buy these 2 ships. 16,000 taels of silver. If it was multiplied 10 times, it would be the tax of the Stormy Waves Road for a year. He also spent a lot of money to recruit many sailors and desperados. Within a short span of 5 days, he had spent 20,000 taels of silver. Everyone said that Lord Lu had lost his mind. He bought Sea King Lu Fei's ship, chose to go to sea in winter, and was said to be looking for the Dragon Island. He probably would not be able to return alive. And so, 5 days later, the Danfeng harbor, which was 10 miles away from Whitewater Town, was bustling. 2 huge ships were anchored on the sea 1 kilometer away like 2 hills. Dozens of small boats were going back and forth between the huge ships and the harbor, transporting all kinds of materials. The draft of these 2 ships was too deep, and the Danfeng harbor near Whitewater Town could not accommodate them. There were mountains of food and other goods in the harbor, and sailors who came from all directions. There were also some people who came to sell goods, snacks, and prostitutes. Lu Baishui sat in the hall on the 3rd floor of a restaurant near the harbor, looking out and having a panoramic view of the situation on the harbor. It was still early in the morning, and the recruited sailors had already been busy all night. They would be able to set sail by ship around noon. But they came here because they wanted to see someone. About midnight last night, someone suddenly came to find Lu Baishui. He said that there was a new sea ban. No ships were allowed to go to sea until the beginning of spring, no exceptions. In the morning, Xie Sun, the prefect of the governor's office, would come to explain this matter. Lu Baishui sent someone to entertain them and send them off. Then they waited for Prefect Xie in the only restaurant on the harbor. At this moment, Prefect Xie was in front of them. It happened so suddenly. I don't know why you thought of this. Prefect Xie was about 30 years old, young and promising. He had a long beard, a white face and narrow eyes. He looked like a gentleman. His tone and tone were also very easygoing. I can't persuade you. The 2 ships were sold to you for 16,000 taels of silver, and you already suspect that I am profiting from it. Alas. So I came here to discuss with you. Lu Baishui frowned and looked out of the window. Brother Xie, look at the situation outside. The people and the goods are all here. Now you suddenly say that I can't leave. I am in a difficult position. Is there any way to make an exception? Of course there was a way. Lu Baishui had been in Jianghu for many years, how could he not know? Before last night, she had thought that Xie Sun was a good friend who got along well with each other. Only now did she realize that he was actually the same as those people. He came here at this time and said that he couldn't leave. Then, there is a way. Alas, it depends on whether Brother Lu is willing. Prefect Xie sighed. It looked like it was difficult. Lu Baishui laughed coldly in his heart. But he didn't show it on his face. As long as there is a way, Brother Xia, I have almost 1,000 taels of silver here. There is a way. Brother Xia, you can take it and help me get things done. If it is not enough, just call someone to the East Sea Inn. Prefect Xia frowned. What are you talking about? His face was a bit ugly. If Brother Lu thinks I am here to talk about this, I am leaving now. Xia Baishui was stunned. But he hurriedly said, it is a misunderstanding. Brother Xia, I misunderstood. Then what is it? Xia Sun angrily stared at Lu Baishui for a while, then sighed and waved his hand. Forget it. The way I am talking about is that you take a person with you. I don't know where this person is from. He looks like a Taoist priest. A few days ago, there was some evil in the governor's office, and this person came to clean it up. Then he won the governor's favor. He also told the governor that there was a celestial medicine in the mountains overseas, and that he could get it for the governor. Alas, we talked about this in private. Prefect Xia snorted, then sighed. The governor said he wanted to ban the sea. He also wanted to find a fleet to send this Taoist priest to meet the immortals overseas. He liked these 2 ships. But I didn't know. Alas. So now there is only one way. You take him with you. Nominally, these 2 ships are under his control and he can use them so he can ignore the sea ban. Lu Baishui was silent for a while and his face was a bit ugly. When Prefect Xia said they couldn't go to sea, his face was normal. Now that there was a way to solve the problem, he looked like this. Was strange. But Prefect Xia didn't seem to care about his expression. He just waited for him to take a sip of tea. Finally, Lu Baishui raised his head and smiled. Okay. Brother Xia, can I see the Taoist priest first? Prefect Xia clapped his hands and smiled. Of course you can. Brother Lu really knows the big picture. Taoist priest Xia, please come out. So the person was already here. In fact, this was also within Lu Baishui's expectation. The 2 ships were priced at 16,000 taels of silver. It was indeed a good deal. If he hired someone to build them, not only would it take a long time, but the manpower and materials needed would be more than 100,000 taels of silver. Before today he thought this Prefect Xia was trying to make friends with him. But now he realized he was being slaughtered like a fat sheep. Lu Baishui also had this day. He paid for the purchase of the ship, for the recruitment of the seamen, for the preparation of the stores. Then the sea ban was issued and the Taoist priest Xia and a group of soldiers were sent. His 2 ships became the governments. These government officials. They were even more ruthless than demons when it came to eating people. This was the first time he suffered like this. Chapter 595. If it was a few years ago he would have cut off this dog official's head. But now he was more knowledgeable and knew that a moment of anger could not solve the problem. It could even make the problem worse. So he endured it. At this time Xia Daozhang, whom Xia Sun had mentioned, walked in. Lu Baishui was stunned when he saw him. Xia Sun said that this Xia Daozhang was killing demons in the governor's office and persuaded the commander-in-chief of the Stormy Wave Road to go to the sea to find the Spirit Mountain. He thought he should be a respectable Lao Dao. Unexpectedly, the person in front of him was a young man. He was not very tall but not too short either. His skin was a little dark as if he often worked in the mountains. The rest were thin eyebrows, eyes, nose and mouth. He did not look beautiful or ugly. There was nothing special about him. He was wearing a green Taoist robe and his face was calm. Was this the person? Seeing his surprise, Xia Sun smiled. Brother Lu, don't underestimate Xia Daozhang. He is very powerful. With Xia Daozhang you will be safe on the sea. You don't have to worry about demons or sea monsters. Ah. He laughed and then stood up. Okay. I have told you everything. Go with Xia Daozhang and 100 soldiers of the commander-in-chief. Listen to Xia Daozhang's command and go to the sea together. Taoist, I will leave now. He bowed to Xia Daozhang. The young Xia Daozhang returned the salute with a serious expression. Xia Daozhang didn't look at Lu Baishui again and went downstairs. Master Lu looked at the young Taoist in front of him and sighed. Xia Daozhang, come with me. The commander-in-chief of the East Sea Road left Xia Daozhang with 100 soldiers under the command of a brigade commander. Nominally they were escorting Xia Daozhang to find the Spirit Mountain, but in fact they were taking over the 2 ships by force. Lu Baishui's 2 ships recruited nearly 400 sailors. Those who could go to the sea at this time were all outlaws and had some skills. Once they fought with these soldiers on the sea they might not be able to win. But now he was a hero of the Stormy Wave Road. He was no longer a carefree teenager. Many people depended on him to survive and make a living. No matter how much hatred he felt, he couldn't really cause trouble on the sea. He could only obediently hand over the 2 giant ships. Both the imperial official Xie and the governor knew that he could not do anything about it. Thereupon he boarded the boat on which he, Li Yunxin, and the others were on the Bayan. He left Xie Daozhang and the rest of the officers and soldiers behind, and told the others to entertain them, while he himself went straight to the third floor. The third floor of the ship was windy and unstable. It was cold in the winter and hot in the summer. It was not a good place to be. But Lu Baishui was not afraid of the cold, and Li Yunxin didn't seem to be afraid of the cold either. Lu Baishui, Li Yunxin, and his cousin, the ninth young master, were divided into 3 rooms on the upper floor. The remaining sailors and seamen of a higher class lived on the first and second floors as was customary. The rest lived in the lower cabins. Each ship had about 200 people and 2 captains. One of them was Lu Baishui's former right-hand man, and the other was a trusted old friend. They also brought some of their friends and relatives, established rules and regulations, and established the hierarchy and so on. Then the ship was in good order. Lu Baishui always trusted others to do these things. A person's energy was limited, and naturally he couldn't be good at everything. If he chose the right people and didn't doubt them, he could save a lot of energy. The Bayan mostly carried people and also some goods. On the way to Dragon Island they would pass by some islands. Those islands were also under the jurisdiction of the Stormy Waves Path, so they weren't considered outsiders. In the past, when he was running business, he often traded with these islanders. Now on the ship, some were going to the islands and some were going there to do business. It was like buying a one-way ticket. In fact, when they recruited the sailors, they said they would trade along the way, explore the outside world, and maybe find treasures. The other ship was full of supplies. There were only about 100 seamen in charge of maintenance. According to Li Yunxin, this was a supply ship. The name of the ship was also appropriate. It was called Hai Tsong. Li Yunxin got off the ship in the morning and stayed in his room. When Lu Baishui rushed in, he was leaning against the window reading a jade slip in his hand. But this jade slip was transparent, and there were no words or pictures on it. But Master Lu was not in the mood to be curious about this. He closed the door behind him and angrily sat at the table in the room. He slapped the table and said, "That's too much." Li Yunxin leaned against the window. After a while, he glanced at him. "Who made you so angry?" Ha, ho. He was so angry that he laughed. "It's those 2 dog officials." Then with a rare angry tone, he told Lu Baishui what had happened. Li Yunxin quietly listened to him, and then slowly put the jade slip into his sleeve. He laughed. "So, it's interesting. I used to know that there was an emperor who didn't want to die, so he looked for people to go to the immortal mountain to find elixirs. It's the first time I heard that a governor would do such a thing." Lu Baishui frowned. "Humph. Those dog officials, there's nothing they can't do." Li Yunxin looked at him for a while. Until Master Lu was a little confused, he said, "It seems that Brother Lu is really interested in Jianghu. You don't know much about the court." Lu Baishui blinked. It seemed that Li Yunxin's attitude had calmed his anger a little. "Brother Li, what do you mean?" "I really don't like those things. In my opinion, this is a rebellion." Li Yunxin put his hands behind his back, stood up, and paced slowly in the room. He looked rational and wise, like a gentleman. "Think about it, Brother Lu. The emperor is looking for the elixir of immortality, so that he can live forever and see the imperial power. He, a governor, is looking for the elixir of immortality. What would he do if he found it? Be a governor for a lifetime? Be an emperor until he dies? That's a taboo." After saying that, he paused for a moment. "Oh, I remember now. No wonder. The emperor of the East Sea Kingdom is dead." During the Battle of Cloud Mountain, the fake saint of the Freemasonry urgently recalled the wandering souls that were sent to various countries. But those wandering souls were afraid that the emperors and nobles of various countries would commit suicide, so they took them away. After that, these people were kept in Su Yusong's sleeves. During the battle, they were affected and killed. As a matter of fact, no one really cared when or where he died. They were just mortals after all. The emperors of the human world, the pinnacle of power. During the battle of the demons, no one cared about them like dust. In that case, even their souls might have been destroyed. But Lu Baishui seemed very confused. Where did Brother Li hear the news? The emperor is dead? Li Yunxin thought again, then smiled. "Oh, you don't know yet. The world is going to change." It had only been slightly over 20 days since the Battle of Cloud Mountain. In this era where information was extremely undeveloped, not many people knew about this. Or even if they found out that the emperor, the empress, and a group of nobles had disappeared, they had to hide it. Otherwise, without a leader, there would be chaos immediately. After a few days they would slowly take care of things and find a way to deal with it. Only then would they announce these things to the world. But they must have changed their faces. Lu Baishui was shocked by this news. He wanted to ask more, but Li Yunxin only said mysteriously, "Brother Lu, you will know when the time comes. I heard Brother Lu mention that you once knew a black knife heroing?" He had originally come to complain to Li Yunxin that he had been schemed against by a corrupt official. But then Li Yunxin said some very shocking news. Now he suddenly jumped to black knife heroing. This made Lu Baishui a little confused. But after saying this for a while, the anger in his heart gradually subsided. He sighed, "Yes. A few years ago in the Qing Kingdom at Mount Chuyun, we got to know each other through a fight. He ran the Black Stockade Castle and could be considered a hero. But his way of doing things is a little strange." Li Yunxin thought of the first time he met Ing Juren, more than a little strange. This Lu Baishui really did not stick to one style of making friends with talented people. He smiled again. "Brother Lu, don't you know about his recent situation?" Lu Baishui was stunned and slowly frowned. "Brother Li, what do you know?" After saying this he did not wait for Li Yunxin to speak. "I heard some news about him a few days ago. He seemed to be in trouble in the Yu Kingdom. So he asked the martial artists of the Central Plains to help him. But recently, there has been no news." "Brother Li." Li Yunxin nodded. The speed of information transmission in this era was so slow that it made people's hair stand on end. The Yu Kingdom and the Donghai Kingdom were separated by two countries, so Lu Baishui did not know about Ing Juren's affairs in the Yu Kingdom. He said in a low voice, "The Black Blade hero Ing you know is now Prince Rong. When he was in the Yu Kingdom he did not run into trouble but started a rebellion. A month ago he had already swallowed half of the Yu Kingdom, and now he might have swallowed the other half." Lu Baishui blinked and looked at Li Yunxin suspiciously. "Brother Li Yunxin immediately smiled. "Don't think too much. I'm not going to be his lobbyist. I have only met him a few times. I'm just lamenting. Brother Lu. Although you are unrestrained in the Jianghu, you are actually like a fish in a jar. When you have not run into a wall, of course you feel the world is vast, but you can never experience the feeling of being a fish in the vast sea or a bird in the high sky. For example, today, a judge from the stormy waves path can completely control you, and you can't do anything about it. Have you ever thought of going out of the jar?" Lu Baishui frowned. He repeated the words, "the fish in the vast sea and the bird in the high sky," several times, then sighed, "Alas. Someone once said something like this to me. But I didn't take it to heart. It is not the first time I have encountered something like this, but I always feel something is wrong, right?" Li Yunxin said in a gentle tone, "The government governs the country, but it is difficult for the imperial power to govern the countryside. Only the local gentry can govern the countryside. Even if the government doesn't like people like you, they won't easily offend you. But today you were cheated of 20,000 taels of silver. Isn't it strange?" Lu Baishui's eyes lit up and he slapped the table. "Yes. Now that you mention it, I come to my senses. I feel there's something not quite right about it. So this is where the problem lies. Because we are going to slaughter a fat sheep, my friend." Li Yunxin slowly walked to the door, opened it a little and then closed it again. He said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, think about it. For example, the Emperor of the East Sea Kingdom is really dead. Then when the governor of the Stormy Waves Path heard the news, he wanted to rebel. That's why he dared to send people out to the sea to look for magic herbs. If he wants to rebel, he naturally needs to recruit soldiers. But where does the money come from? The sheep are the problem." Lu Baishui was stunned and frowned. "Brother Li, you said? But you also said that we need the local gentry to govern. But we don't need people like you. You are a coiled dragon lying in the shallow water of the Stormy Waves Road." Li Yunxin looked at him seriously and said every word with certainty. "You have too many friends all over the world. They may be helpful but they may also be a disaster. Rebellion was like putting one's head on the waist of one's trousers. Who dared to take the risk? I am the governor of the Stormy Waves Road, so I will take you down first. I can eliminate the hidden danger and also increase the military budget. It is the best of both worlds. Brother Lu, let me say something first." Li Yunxin walked to Lu Baishui and sat face to face with him, looking into his eyes. "The soldiers on the ship and that Taoist Xie may find a chance to kill you. Believe it or not." Lu Baishui's face became serious. He stared at Li Yunxin for a long time and then said, "You think so?" "I think so." Li Yunxin nodded. "Brother Lu, you can also watch. I know that Taoist priest Xie. Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. I didn't expect to meet him here. Lu Baishui was slightly moved as if he wanted to say, "Why do you know everyone?" Li Yunxin sighed in a low voice, "This is fate. I told you that there was a big change in my family. In fact, my parents were separated because of this person. He looks like a young man, but in fact, Brother Lu, don't treat him as a young man. He is insidious and cunning and very good at disguising. I suspect that he also came to the East Sea Kingdom and also wants to go out to sea, to find my mother." Lu Baishui's eyes widened. "Is that so?" "Haha. He is really pursuing me." This hero stood up, paced around in the room and turned to look at Li Yunxin. "Brother Li, if you trust me, tell me, why is he looking for your mother? What does he want?" A moment ago he was still angry because of the grievances he had suffered. Now that he heard about this, he became indignant because of Li Yunxin's misfortune. In Jianghu, loyalty was the most important word. He had already ruined his family, but he still pursued him. Was a taboo. Li Yunxin waved his hand and smiled. "Brother Lu, you are a good man. But this kind of thing, you'd better not get involved. You should have seen that. I don't practice pure martial arts. Taoist Xie is not an ordinary person. He wants to kill you, and if you happen to escape, he won't waste his energy to chase you. But if you get involved in the matter between me and him, I'm afraid you won't be able to get away." Lu Baishui looked at him. After a while he said, "Are you a cultivator?" Chapter 596. Li Yunxin heaved a sigh of relief. "If I had a choice, I really hope I'm not one of them." Hearing this, Lu Baishui became silent. He had a premonition that this would happen, and now it had come true. For a moment he had mixed feelings and was speechless. But it was not because of anything else. It was because of one thing that mortals cared about the most: life and death. The difference between a cultivator and a mortal was life and death. Maybe many years later Brother Li would still look like this, but he would be old and his hair would be gray. He was not afraid of death, but when he talked about this he still felt a little emotional. Especially when he got along so well with this Brother Li. The two sat in silence for a while. Lu Baishui said, "You didn't ask me to participate in these things. What about you? This Taoist yet chased you all the way. How did you deal with him?" Li Yunxin smiled. "Since he came to the ship and you told me I'm in the dark, I have a way to disguise myself. After I disguise myself, I'm no different from an ordinary person in his eyes. We're about to go out to sea. When we get there, there will only be 2 people on our ships. This Taoist Xie usually has many eyes and ears. But now that there is no one else, I can take this opportunity to check if there are still spies on the ship." Then Brother Lu, Li Yunxin looked at him seriously. "Let's think about how to deal with him." Lu Baishui frowned and thought for a while. He said in a deep voice, "Okay." When he heard Li Yunxin say, "In his eyes, I'm no different from an ordinary person," he realized that the ordinary-looking Taoist Xie was actually terrifyingly powerful. Brother Li was a top-notch martial arts master, and he knew some supernatural powers, but in his eyes he was no different from an ordinary person. He couldn't help but feel a little scared and worried. He misunderstood Li Yunxin's words. But this was exactly what Li Yunxin wanted. He had many reasons to disguise himself as an ordinary person to go out to sea. Putting aside what he said before, he wanted to understand the situation around Dragon Island first. There was also another reason. He felt that after the battle at Cloudy Mountain and the parting with Li Chunfeng, he had already escaped from Mu Nanju's sight. But he wasn't sure. Therefore he needed an isolation room. A relatively enclosed environment where he could make sure that there were no more spies around him. Going out to sea was a good choice. No matter how many people who shouldn't have entered the 2 ships, once they reached the vast sea, they would become a relatively closed environment. In such an environment he could slowly examine every suspicious person. After all that was done, he had truly disappeared from the sight of Southernwood residents or any other forces. Moreover, it was said that the Dragon Island was surrounded by weak water. Once in that kind of environment, even spies and other strange abilities that he didn't know about would lose their effect. All he had to face was a group of ordinary people. Dealing with ordinary people was something he was very good at. However, this Xie Sheng actually wanted to go to the Dragon Island. It was within his expectations but also beyond his expectations. It was within his expectations. When Li Yunxin first met him, this Xie Sheng mistook the little demon protector for the organization he was looking for. Then when Li Yunxin talked to him, he repeatedly hinted to him, causing him to gradually develop the idea that this world is extremely dangerous. Don't easily reveal your identity, don't trust anyone. This kind of paranoid thinking caused Xiexing to immediately develop a strong sense of distrust when he saw Li Chunfeng, causing him to turn around and run away. And because of this kind of thinking, he would stubbornly believe in his own judgment, and strengthen his own judgment. Therefore, sooner or later, he would inquire about the little demon protector. But unexpectedly, this Xiexing actually went straight to the Dragon Island by chance. This was different from the impression that Li Yunxing had of Xiexing when they first met. The Xiexing he knew was very smart and cautious. He planted some kind of psychological suggestion in him, and it was also in line with his intelligence and cautiousness. But now, Xiexing acted like a fool or a rash person, and directly went to look for the Lord Shinryu. Was it just because he heard that the Lord Shinryu was the backer of the little demon protector? Just based on this, it shouldn't be enough for him to risk his life. Something abnormal must have happened. What was the reason that caused a smart person like Xiexing to firmly believe that the Lord Shinryu was the person he was looking for? Li Yunxin let out a sigh of relief. A thought appeared in his mind. But this thought didn't just appear in his mind. It had been in his mind for a long time. He had experienced many things and also learned many details from them. The many seemingly unrelated but closely related details slowly made this idea clearer and clearer in his mind. And now, what Xiexing had done had caused this thought in his mind to become even clearer. After thinking for a while, Li Yunxin raised his hand and rubbed his face, as if he was tired and needed to relax. Lu Baishui was about to call someone to bring a basin of warm water, but he saw that Li Yunxin had already put his hand down. He was shocked. Li Yunxin had changed his appearance. He had turned into a young man who looked about 14 or 15 years old. His appearance was also pleasant, but not as handsome as before. It would make people's eyes light up, but it wouldn't leave a deep impression. Li Yunxin smiled and stood up. Lu Baishui found that his body also became shorter. "Brother Li, you are just a little trick." Li Yunxin smiled. His voice also changed. It was clear and sweet, and he did sound like a young master. "Now, I am a merchant who is taking a boat to sea. I can see if there are any ghosts on the boat and how many ghosts there are." Lu Baishui was stunned for a while, but when you boarded the boat, if there were spies, they should have already noticed you. Li Yunxin smiled again. "Isn't that good? When we are at sea, they have nowhere to run." After saying this, he cupped his hands to Lu Baishui. "Brother Lu, don't worry. I am here to keep you safe. I will go out and have a look." Then he went straight out of the door. Lu Baishui was left frowning in the room. Because this brotherly, that smile just now was a little strange. Not because of the strange appearance, but because of the strange temperament. He didn't look like he had in the past. Instead, there was a hint of evil in him. What kind of matter had he gotten himself involved in? Lu Baishui sighed and looked out of the window. It was still a cloudy day with gray clouds hanging low in the sky. It was said that there were many big and small whirlpools in the east of the East Sea, but he had never seen them. But now, he felt that the white water town and the Danfeng harbor had become whirlpools. The ship he was on seemed to have become a small boat, and was about to fall into a bigger whirlpool. Chapter 597. At noon, the fleet composed of these two huge ships sailed out to sea. Some people from Whitewater Town came to see, but they weren't very excited. These people, including many people on the ships, didn't think that this voyage would last long. Because the ship owner was Lu Baishui, a man with a lot of money. How could such a man not cherish his life like a fugitive? Also because there were soldiers on the ship, and they heard that the soldiers were escorting a young Taoist priest to find the fairy mountain. Such a person was probably just trying to cheat the governor of his money. He wouldn't really go to find the fairy mountain. They predicted that the two ships would return about 2 months later before the harbor froze. They were only half right. But this was a story for another time. They set off at noon, and the ship gradually sped up. About 2 hours later, they left the Danfeng harbor below sea level. About 6 hours later, when the sky was getting dark, the ship reached its highest speed. There was a strong wind on the sea, but it was a little warmer than on land. For some people who had never been out to sea, it was a rare thing. Those people were rare, and the ninth young master was even more rare. This willful dragon's son had stayed on land and in the Wei River for 1,000 years. He used to think that the Wei River was a magnificent river. Now that he saw the sea, he realized that there was such a vast body of water in the world. People were afraid of the cold, so they all stayed in the cabin. How could he be afraid of the cold? So he wanted to go out to sea to play. Before today, Li Yunxin wouldn't have agreed. The sea was vast and there were many aquatic creatures. There must be more demons there than on land. If this troublemaker caused any trouble, there would be trouble. But now that he knew that Xie Sheng was on the ship, he couldn't wait for the ninth young master to leave. You could say that he was naive or stupid. He couldn't defeat Xie Sheng and he would give himself away sooner or later. So he asked Lu Baishui to order people to clear out a cabin with ballast stones and seal it. He and the ninth young master used the escape method to enter that cabin, and told the ninth young master to leave the bottom of the ship and play in the sea. Then, he started to do his own things. He moved to the bottom cabin. Most of the seamen and sailors lived in the lower decks, and some of the travelers and merchants also lived in the lower decks. At this time of year it was rare for big ships to go out to sea. Therefore, when people heard that Lu Baishui's ships were going to the east, many people came to visit their relatives and sell goods on the islands in the east. Originally he could only wait until the beginning of spring, but now he had caught a bargain. Thus they were not familiar with each other, which gave him a chance to sneak in. Just like that, another 4 days passed. It had been a very busy 4 days. In these 4 days this 14-year-old young Master Li got to know many people. It was because he had just entered the world, and his whole body was filled with eagerness and enthusiasm. He couldn't wait to appear worldly when interacting with people. But in the eyes of a young man like him, being worldly probably meant spending money to make friends and showing off his family background. In the eyes of truly astute people he was an idiot. But who doesn't like idiots like that? After 4 days of hard work, he had already spent several dozen taels of silver. He kept saying things like, "My father told me to have more friends and more paths." But he didn't know that not all friends were needed, and not all money was given to friends. On the 5th day, since he was familiar with half of the people on the ship, he accidentally let slip that when he was young he once saw a stone tablet by a bridge, and on the tablet was a Taoist poem. It was strange to see such a tablet in such a remote place, so he stopped and read the poem on the tablet. But he knew that this poem was written by a great scholar after he abandoned his official position and lived in seclusion. Very few people knew about it. On a small mound next to the tablet, there was an old man with a sage-like appearance reading a book. So he asked the old man, "Sir, why is there such a poem here?" The old man put down the book and looked at him, saying, "This is a Taoist poem written by Zhou Muduan in his later years. You know it at such a young age?" Then he put down the book, invited him to the house by the bridge to drink tea and talked with him again. Then he realized that although this young man looked young and inexperienced, like an ignorant and incompetent son of a rich family, in fact, he was very insightful about the way of Ili. So he said, "I have carved this poem for so long, but no one can tell its origin. Now that you know it, it seems that fate has come for us." So he took him as his disciple and taught him the art of prying into the secrets of heaven. There was a reason why Li Yunxin told such a story. When he was trapped on Cloud Mountain he chatted with Xian Shiliu and Su Yusong for the first few days. Although there was a storm hidden in their laughter, he did learn some stories related to Daotong. In his story, Zhou Muduan, who abandoned his official position and lived in seclusion, actually became a cultivator in the end. Moreover, he was extremely talented, and his cultivation realm advanced by leaps and bounds. It only took him 446 years to enter the Grand Supreme Realm and become the 211th saint of Daotong. As for the old man on the mound, he was also very famous in Daotong. He was later the Grand Master of Langya Cave of Daotong and an expert who had reached the profound realm. The he in the story was called Lu Xingfu in the secular world. After receiving the old man's teachings, he had been walking in the secular world and had a son and a daughter. Later, he comprehended the way in his old age and cultivated to the Grand Supreme Realm in 916 years. He became the 212th saint of Daotong. He was the master of the 213th sword Saint Yu Meng. It was unlikely that mortals in the secular world knew this story. But cultivators must know. The people of Munanju and the Freemasonry must also know. Because of the 3 people in the story, there were actually 2 saints. This was a very rare thing and could be considered an anomaly in the cultivation world. But now he was behaving like an ordinary person who didn't know anything. Once someone knew about this old rumor, they would definitely pay attention to him. Once they focused their attention on him, there would always be a flaw in their defense. So many people jokingly asked him to read their fortunes. Li Yunxin was not proficient in this, but he was proficient in psychology. He had been with this group of people for so many days. How could he not see who lived a hard life, who had a disharmonious family, who was timid and who might have a blood feud? So, with his glib tongue, when he talked about these people's past, good or bad, there was no one who was wrong. This group of people was really shocked. Only then did they know that this was really a little immortal. Soon the news spread throughout the ship. So, another 3 days passed. When the two giant ships reached the Chuliao Sea, the first fish took the bait. Li Yunxin lived in a narrow cabin in the lower cabin. At midnight, the cabin door was gently pushed open. A woman with a headscarf and coarse clothes walked in. But her appearance could still be called elegant. Li Yunxin did not sleep. He lay on the hammock with his arms as a pillow. He did not seem surprised by the woman's arrival. So, the woman stared at him expressionlessly and said softly, "People of Mu Nanju, or the Freemasonry." Chapter 598. Li Yunxin's cabin was on the upper floor, so he had a small porthole open. He had originally opened the porthole, so at this time faint moonlight shone in. He looked at the woman for a while under the moonlight, stretched and smiled. Oh, it's the wife of the Wu family. This Miss Wu from the Wu clan was only slightly less famous than him on this dragon warship. Because there was only one woman on the whole ship, and she was the wife of Wu Jiasong, a merchant on the same ship. The two of them were going to Chongji Island, where the wife of the Wu family's maiden family was. She was not ugly and could even be considered pretty. She was warm and cheerful, and Wu Jiasong doted on her, so she was quickly known by the people on the ship. These days she was the subject of many dirty jokes by the men on the ship. Occasionally Wu Jiasong would hear them, but he could only sulk and hope to get off the ship as soon as possible. After Li Xiaoxian's reputation spread, this woman also came to him to see her fortune. In fact, she was praying for a child. Li Yunxin asked about the details of her life like he asked other people, and carefully observed her, thinking that she should not be the person he was looking for. These days he used this method to check many people. But he did not expect that there would be a time when he failed miserably. This woman was. Or rather, she was one of them. His worries and speculation were correct. As expected, this ship had been infiltrated by the Freemasonry or Southern Woodhouse. These two organizations were really pervasive. But because of this, it proved that he was right to do so. These people mingled with mortals, and most of them were also mortals. It was difficult to find them with magic, so he could only use mortal methods to deal with them. Otherwise it would be like an elephant fighting an ant. Even if he had great strength, how could he beat them? So he said again, "You really hit it well. You said you were bought by Wu Jiasong when you were 7 and married him when you were 12? Are you lying to me?" The woman stared at him for a while, then closed the door and said, "It's true. My real name is Pan He. Don't call me the wife of the Wu family. Your Excellency, which side are you from?" Li Yunxin snorted with a smile. "If I said something wrong, wouldn't I be killed by you?" Pan He shook her head solemnly. "You are also a watertight person. If you hadn't intentionally told me that story, I wouldn't have been able to find you. Since it's intentional, it must be to lure me out." But he said that he was wrong and was afraid that I would kill him. "Your Excellency must be someone from Mu Nanju." Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat. He originally thought that it would be the so-called servants of Southern Wood residents. Although he did think of the Freemasons when he was considering it, it was only out of habit. This was because after the battle on Cloud Mountain, almost all the wandering souls were abandoned by the so-called elders. With the death of the two false saints, the remaining wandering souls scattered in all directions. The leaders were all gone. Those who didn't know the inside story wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Moreover, they had no reason to keep an eye on him. But now that Pan He guessed that she was from Mu Nanju, it meant that she was from the Freemasonry. Damn it. Why are these things still haunting me? What did they want to do now? As soon as he thought of this, the smile on his face disappeared. His body swayed slightly and he jumped down from the hammock. "Oh? So you are a member of the Freemasonry. Strange. All of you have already become wandering ghosts, so why are you still involved in this matter? Why are you looking for me?" The cabin was narrow. Pan He slowly took a step back and calmly said, "Now we are no longer enemies. There is no reason for us to have a conflict." Li Yunxin smiled. "I am a servant, I only care about doing things. It's useless to say this to me, no matter what you are here to do. In short, you will only hinder me. Die." Pan He immediately put her hand into her sleeve and took out something. She said calmly, "If you want to kill me, then we will die together. And sink this ship. No matter what you want to do, you can't do it anymore." Li Yunxin frowned and pretended to hesitate. Then he saw that she was holding a black iron egg in her hand. This thing is called a hand grenade, hand thunder. Once it is triggered, there is nothing it cannot destroy within 10 steps, and everything within 100 steps will be destroyed. When Pan He said these words, her tone was a little stiff. Obviously, this was what the person who gave this thing to her said, and now she had learned it. I don't want to use it, and don't force me to use it. Your Excellency, listen to me first. Li Yunxin pretended to be afraid. Pan He thought that her plan had worked, so she put down the grenade. The Freemasonry is no longer the Freemasonry of the past. In the past, we only knew to serve the elders, and Mu Nanju was one of our enemies. As for why we were enemies, I am not very clear. Now that the elders are gone, of course, there is no reason for us to be enemies. Let me interrupt. Li Yunxin said, what is your identity in the Freemasonry? How can you say such things? What Pan He said was obviously not something a small character should know. It was like a low-level civil servant talking about how to interact with other countries. Of course it was okay to talk in private. But to seriously think that he could make decisions was really crazy when compared to the ambassadors of other countries. Pan He smiled faintly and said confidently, in the new Freemasonry I am in charge of the Donghai Kingdom. And your Excellency, if I am not mistaken, should be the Donghai Kingdom's shopkeeper. We heard that you are also on the ship. We are a little surprised to see you tonight. Your Excellency is really a little young. There was also a Donghai Kingdom's shopkeeper on the ship. He cast the net and wanted to catch the small fish. He didn't expect to find two big fish swimming over. It was really, damn it. Li Yunxin was stunned at first, then smiled. You know how to read people. So, in charge? Nice to meet you. Tell me, what is your so-called new Freemasonry going to do? Pan He's expression became serious. Let's talk about your Freemasonry first. We have always known that your Freemasonry likes to use ordinary people, claiming to come from the masses and to the masses. Although I am not clear about the ultimate goal of your Freemasonry, I am clear about your position. You don't like the old Freemasonry, and in fact you don't like the old Shenmen either. You want the world to be a world of mortals, so you want to get rid of my Freemasonry first and then Shenmen, right? Li Yunxin blinked. He had naturally tried to figure out what Mu Nanju wanted to do, but he was not sure. However, he could see the inclination and position that Pan He mentioned. Mu Nanju indeed didn't like cultivators. Otherwise he wouldn't have asked Li Chunfeng to go to Xianmen to kidnap his mother. This could be confirmed from the Battle of Yunshan. Mu Nanju's people added fuel to the fire. They were ruthless to the Freemasonry, but they were also merciless to Xianmen. So he smiled mysteriously. It seems that shopkeeper Pan has done a lot of homework. So what about your Freemasonry now? A few days ago we no longer had any goals. The elders abandoned us and the Lord died, Pan He said. So the people's hearts gradually dispersed and we were about to fall apart. There must be a reason why a group of people gathered together. Money and fame are all reasons, but there is no way to gather people's hearts. So, we have set a new goal. Li Yunxin thought for a while. Oh? What goal? It is similar to your Freemasonry's goal and it complements each other. Pan He said straightforwardly, exterminate the dragons. Li Yunxin was stunned for a while. Exterminate the dragons? Your Freemasonry doesn't like Shenmen because they exploit the people. The dragons are the same. Although the demons and Shenmen hate each other, they are of the same nature. They should be exterminated so that the mortals can live a good life. Moreover, that dragon head and dragon son are the culprits who almost destroyed our Freemasonry. Whether for public or private reasons, the dragons and demons should all die. This is our new goal. Shopkeepers should also know that the demons of the dragons have set up a little demon protection association in the Yi Kingdom. They say it is for the well-being of the demons, but also to treat the people well. It sounds better than the demons of Shenmen in the past. However, it is just a change in form. At most, it is an improvement. However, if the mortals want a new world, improvement can't be changed. The old class must be overthrown. Demons, Shenmen, cultivators, they should all be swept into the garbage. When she said this, Li Yunxin hurriedly said, Stop. What you said. Who said it? It sounded more and more familiar. This shouldn't be the tone of the people of this world. Goddamn, he had worked so hard to bring down the Freemasons. Now they have become a sacred organization fighting for the interests of mortals? He worked hard to earn the identity of Dragon Son for himself, but now it has become a backward and reactionary class to be overthrown? What the hell is this? Are these people from the Freemasonry addicted to making trouble? Pan He paused. I read it from a book. Damn it. Li Yunxin sighed. Don't lie to me that I don't read enough. Which book says this now? Improvement? Class. Pan He finally smiled. This was the first time she smiled. But it was a very annoying smile. It was the kind of, I don't care about people like you who don't know much kind of feeling. A D person wrote it. But it's not a book that you can read. Although the Lord is not here, the foundation of Yunshan is gone. But we have stations all over the Midland. In the stations there are things that you can't imagine. For example this. She shook the grenade again. The name of this thing was exactly the same as what Li Yunxi knew in his previous life, and its function was also similar. But after a little investigation he knew it was not the same thing. This thing was not filled with gunpowder or explosives. It looked like it was refined with magic. It was not difficult to detonate it, just hit it hard. The thing inside should be very unstable. She brought this with her. How bold. Crazy. Li Yunxin snorted. You used to kill innocent people, how much killing you have done. But now you say that you are just and selfless for the well-being of the world? Do you dare to ask for such well-being? Pan He was still smiling. Same here. You have killed many people, haven't you? 500 years ago when the Qin kingdom changed dynasties, didn't you instigate it? How many innocent people have died? Besides, she stopped smiling. People like us used to work for the elders. We have experienced the feeling of not being treated as a human, and now we know what it is like to be immortal. It is useless for us to talk about these things. Please tell the owner of Munanju. I have come here to inform your esteemed society of this, and also for other matters. Forgive me for not accompanying you. After saying this she turned around to leave. But Li Yunxin laughed. Leaving in such a hurry? Are you going to find Priscia? While talking he took a step forward and reached out his hand to hold the door. The cabin was narrow and it was a long and narrow rectangle. His hammock was on the side near the window, and the space on this side of the door could only allow two people to talk at most 2 steps away from each other. Now that he reached out his hand to hold the door, Pan He had nowhere to go. She turned around, she was very close to Li Yunxin, and they actually became intimate and domineering. Pan He was startled. But then she calmed down and smiled. What, after walking on the sea for so many days, are you feeling lonely? Your young body may not be enough to satisfy me. Li Yunxin had turned into a young man and he was not tall. But Pan He was considered tall among women, and so she was about the same height as Li Yunxin. Now that she said these words, it was like a beautiful young woman talking to a handsome young man, and it made the atmosphere in the cabin a bit lewd. He smiled coldly. Manager, you misunderstand. I just want to ask. At this point Pan He suddenly reached out and grabbed his lower body. She still had a smile on her face. I also like young men like you. Li Yunxin immediately took a step back and said in a low voice, You want to die. 3 steel needles were inserted into the ground. They were the kind of horseshoe needles that women used for work, and they were as long as a finger. Now almost all of them were inserted into the wooden floor, and only the tip of the needle was exposed. If someone's mind wavered and was caught by her, he was afraid that he would die a painful death. But Pan He still smiled. Manager, what do you want to ask? If you don't want me to leave, I won't leave tonight. As she said this, she moved closer to Li Yunxin. A cold light flashed between her fingers. Li Yunxin looked at her with a cold face. You want to fight? That means Xie Sheng is an important person to you? Why do you want to find him? I just want to tell him something. Pan He stopped. As if seeing that Li Yunxin did not stop her, she also stopped. She didn't want to cause more trouble. Manager, if you want to know, I can tell you. Tell him to go to Dragon Island and find trouble with Shinryu. Find trouble with Shinryu? Li Yunxin frowned. Why? Pan He was stunned. Then she slowly took a step back and carefully looked at Li Yunxin. Her face changed slightly. You are not the manager of East Sea Kingdom. Who are you? Li Yunxin was silent for a while, then he raised his head and smiled. When did I admit that I am the manager of East Sea Kingdom? Little auntie, you think too highly of yourself. Pan He immediately raised her hand and did not say anything more. There was a buzzing sound in the air, and at least 20 steel needles shot towards Li Yunxin like a storm. After making this move, she pulled out a silver dagger from her hair bun and thrust it forward. Everything happened in an instant in this small cabin. No matter how skilled he was, he could not avoid it, unless he broke through the porthole. But then he would fall into the sea. But there was a crisp sound. The steel needles twisted and fell to the ground. Pan He's knife and wrist were also twisted. The body of young Master Li, in front of her, was stronger than iron, and the strength of her wrist made her fracture. The master of the Freemasonry was shocked, but he did not hesitate. Knowing that he could not win, he immediately took out the grenade in his hand and was about to throw it to the ground. But this hand was suddenly grabbed by young Master Li's hand. She did not see how he moved. But in the end, the impact of their wrists colliding caused the extremely unstable grenade to explode. Green smoke immediately sizzled out of the grenade. Pan He subconsciously narrowed her eyes, ready to welcome the death she did not want but could not do anything about. But she saw. Young Master Li snatched the grenade in her hand, he stuffed it into his mouth. Her eyes widened in horror, both because when he opened his mouth, he grinned from ear to ear, and because of the 2 rows of sharp shining fangs in his mouth. But also because Li Yunxin closed his mouth and swallowed it. After 2 breaths, he burped. There was a small flame accompanied by smoke, spitting out from his mouth and quickly dissipating in the air. He turned to look at Pan He and laughed. It's a little hot. But it's satisfying. Now let's talk about Xie Sheng and the manager of East Sea Kingdom. Chapter 599. Only then did Pan He realize that the person in front of her was not a human, but she could no longer move. An invisible force enveloped the entire room. She had walked right into the trap. Li Yunxin looked at her and smiled. As the person in charge of a country, your way of doing things is not rational or meticulous at all. From this we can see that your new Freemasonry is worse than before. My friend, you can't just do things on impulse and enthusiasm. You have to have a plan. Pan He opened her mouth and exhaled. Then he realized that he could still speak. With a trembling voice he asked, "What are you?" Hearing this, Li Yunxin blinked her eyes in surprise. He slowly took a step back and pointed at her from afar. You're asking me what it is? So you've never seen a demon before? Oh, then what was your previous identity in the Freemasonry? Pan He blinked her eyes nervously as if her eyelids were twitching. I used to work in Huzhou. As expected. A small character who has just achieved success. Li Yunxin nodded in understanding. It seems that your association is short of talent. His tone was not small at all. All right, Pan He, it's good that you know fear. Next, you will answer whatever I ask you and you may not die. There are only so many people on this ship. It would be troublesome to kill you. However, Pan He was still hesitating. After hesitating for a while, she finally gathered her courage and said, "Even if you are a demon, don't you hate the rule of the dragons? You little demons, aren't you the same as mortals? You're enslaved and bullied by the dragons and other big demons." But she didn't know what she had said wrong. Suddenly she saw a strange smile on young Master Li's face. He stopped talking. However, after some thought he said, "We can still work together. Just like with Mu Nanju, since you can pretend to be immortal you must like the life in the human world." But the more she said so, the wider the smile on young Master Li's face became. Finally, the other party seemed to be unable to hold it in any longer. He waved his hand with a smile and was about to speak. At this moment, suddenly, a man came in through the porthole. Pan He's heart skipped a beat. She thought that the situation had changed. Perhaps it was the people from Southernwood House. But he was soon disappointed. The newcomer didn't seem to be human. Rather than drilling in through the porthole, it would be more accurate to say that it penetrated in. The porthole was like an illusion to him. This person was a tall young man, also dressed in white. However, his hair and clothes were all wet. As soon as he entered the cabin, he shouted, "Strange! The waters were too deep. Guess what I saw?" As he spoke, he shook himself violently like an excited puppy. With a loud bang, the cabin was immediately filled with mist. How strong was he? Not only did he shake off the water on his body, he even blasted the air. Pan He took the full brunt of the blow, and blood immediately oozed from her eyes and ears. It was only then that the newcomer noticed Pan He and was slightly stunned. Li Yunxin sighed, "You should be gentler. It wasn't easy for me to catch a fish. What if you kill it? Didn't I tell you to come in from under the ship? Someone saw you in my cabin during the day," but the 9th young master didn't take it seriously at all. He only paid attention to the word fish. He immediately became happy and walked to Pan He. He grabbed one of her arms and put it into his mouth. At the same time he said to Li Yunxin, You must have something to ask of me. Otherwise why would you give me blood food? Tell me, I won't refuse." Li Yunxin hurriedly said, Stop, it's not for you to eat." The 9th young master blinked and closed his mouth. But his sharp teeth had already pierced into Pan He's wrist, and a lot of blood gushed out. 3 breaths ago, Pan He was still trying to persuade Li Yunxin. But now she was trembling all over and couldn't say a word. How many people in the world could stand such a scene? Watching herself being eaten alive. When I said big fish, it's just a metaphor. It's not a fish meat. Can you stop making trouble and go out to play again? Li Yunxin sighed. Whales and dolphins in the sea are also mammals. What's the difference between them and human flesh? Can't you go and eat them? The ninth young master blinked and didn't open his mouth. Instead, he quietly bit again. Immediately, there was a series of slight bone-cracking sounds. But Pan-He didn't make a sound either because she was brave or because she was scared out of her wits. The blood gushed out faster. The ninth young master swept the blood into his mouth with his bright red tongue. He said vaguely, no. Let me think, Li Yunxin sighed. He stepped forward and pulled Pan-He's wrist out of the ninth young master's mouth. The whole wrist had been bitten into pieces and became soft. If you suck all the blood, she will still die. This person is the ninth young master who is useful to me. Don't make trouble. The ninth young master curled his lips and licked his lips reluctantly. This taste is not bad. What do you want to do with her? Li Yunxin raised his hand and pressed a few acupoints on Pan-He's arm to stop the bleeding. Nothing interesting, the ninth young master shouted angrily. You don't allow me to eat her and you don't tell me. I want to hear it today. Li Yunxin looked at Pan-He, whose face was as pale as a piece of paper. Then he looked at the ninth young master. In the end, he sighed again. Okay, she is a bad person. After I finish the interrogation, if she doesn't listen to me, I'll send her to you. Is that okay? The ninth young master thought for a while and nodded. That's reasonable. Ask me. I want to hear it. How bad is she? Li Yunxin snorted and looked at Pan-He. What kind of bad idea? Oh, she has killed many people. The ninth young master blinked his eyes. You call this bad? I have eaten many people too. Li Yunxin looked at him helplessly. You are a demon. That's a little different. What's different? The ninth young master blinked his eyes again. Didn't you kill me before because I ate people? Maybe he was lonely these days because he didn't have anyone to talk to. Or maybe he was really tired today and just wanted to chat. He actually talked to Li Yunxin about this. But Li Yunxin didn't scold him like a subordinate. Shinryu wanted the ninth young master to go to Dragon Island. Besides, he was still useful. He could only smile bitterly. I didn't kill you before because you ate people. It was because I wanted to save my own life. It was for my own life. Oh, didn't this woman kill to save her own life? Of course not. Li Yunxin said patiently. She did it for something else. For money, fame, or an illusory belief, she killed many innocent people. The ninth young master became silent after hearing his words. Li Yunxin thought he had lost interest in this topic. So he turned around and wanted to ask Pan-He again. But the ninth young master said again, that's no different. It's no different from you killing people to save your own life or me eating people. When he said this, his tone became serious, which was rare. It was as if a philosophical thought had arisen on the sea, and they were about to have a good talk about killing people. Or maybe, it was because he died in Li Yunxin's hands before. He always felt that his death was not clear. Although it was over, he still couldn't figure it out. What did I do wrong? Li Yunxin's mind was clear. She could vaguely guess what he was thinking. So he was stunned for a while and shrugged. Okay, ninth young master, I will say it. Actually, the original intention is very important in this kind of thing. For example, a person doesn't have the intention to harm people. But someone infringes on his interests such as life and property. So this person wants to protect these things that belong to him, so he fights back and kills people. Let's not talk about the laws of the world here. Then it is justified. This kind of legitimate power can be extended in Jianghu. Because you hurt me, there is hatred between us. Even if one thing is done, people will find you and kill you in the future. To a certain extent, it will be recognized by others. At least it is slightly more justified than killing people for no reason. As for demons, demons are not humans. Demons eating humans was no different from humans and livestock. There was nothing to criticize about it. For example, if the ninth young master didn't know me, it didn't matter to me who he ate. But after he recognized me, he ate the people around me and possibly me. That was a violation of my interests. So I had to find a way to save myself. So I killed you. Among men, it is a very proper thing to do. If I had killed you for fun without knowing you, it would have been a different matter. Do you understand all this? The ninth young master sat on the hammock and swayed slowly for a while. He frowned and said, I don't understand. Li Yunxin was stunned. What don't you understand? For example, I know you. For example, this woman is also your friend. I'm starving now. If I don't eat blood, I won't feel well. I want to eat this woman, but you won't let me. That means you'd rather see me feel sick. Aren't you violating me as well? For example, this woman killed many people she didn't know for fame and profit. But if those people don't die, she won't get fame and profit. If they don't die, aren't they violating her as well? Li Yunxin smiled helplessly. There is a line between violation and non-violation. It meant that you could make yourself feel comfortable, and you could get whatever you wanted. But you must not violate other people's interests. You are a demon. You want to eat people. People are like livestock to you. Then I won't talk about people. I'll talk about demons. Now the person you want to eat is raised by another demon. If you eat other people, does that mean other people don't have food to eat? If you eat my friend, does that mean I don't have any friends? So it's wrong. Ah, I see. The ninth young master frowned. It's troublesome when people are involved. Li Yunxin smiled. Yes. If chickens and ducks talk about equality and the right to life, people will also find it troublesome and hard to understand. Now, does the ninth young master understand? The ninth young master was silent for a while. Then he suddenly said, "It's still wrong." Li Yunxin sighed. "What's wrong?" The ninth young master looked at him seriously. There is no such thing as not violating others. For example, there are 100 people in the world. They are neither yours nor mine. If you eat one, there are only 99 left. But I can eat 100 of them. You think you are doing your own thing, but there are fewer people for me to eat. There are only so many good things in the world. If you use them, there will be fewer for me. For example, this woman asks people to give her money. If people give her money, there will be less for others. For example, if the people of this world believe in us, the dragon children, then everyone will believe in you, and the incense and wish power will all belong to you. But I will have less. We dragon's son. Hearing this, Pan-He suddenly opened her eyes wide, showing a look of disbelief and fear. What you said is the logic of the little people, not our logic. Otherwise, why don't the monster kings like others to expand their territories around them? Because even if they don't belong to them, if others take them away, they will have nothing left to take. Speaking of this, the ninth young master's eyes suddenly brightened. Yes, this is the logic of the little people. We are not little people. Li Yunxin knew what the ninth young master meant by little people. It referred to an insignificant character, an insignificant person in the marketplace. He also understood what the ninth young master meant, an ordinary person with pitifully little power and influence. Living in a village or a city, the resources needed were also very limited. To him, the whole world was inexhaustible. When many of these people gathered together, they formed a human society. Everyone's needs were limited, so they only looked at the things around them. As long as the things around them were not taken away or taken from others, they would be safe. But for some people, for example, the emperor was not a little person. What they needed was territory and people. In their eyes, the world was like a cake that needed to be divided among a few ordinary people. Except for this cake, there was nothing else. If one person took it, there would be less for the other. A person would only be full after eating the whole cake. If he did not eat enough, he would be hungry forever. Under such circumstances, there was no such thing as not harming the interests of others. In other words, other people other than oneself were already harming oneself. He and the ninth young master were not little people. They were the apex predators that surpassed the ordinary people of this world, and even the ordinary demons. The Shinryu, the Rock King, and the Sage of Shenmen were all such predators. Because of this, the justice and truth of the ordinary world were not applicable here. For such existences, the existence of others was evil. To want the justice and truth of these people, the evil of existence must be eliminated. Only slaughter and elimination were their principles of justice and truth. When all the bystanders were eliminated and only one person was left, then all the evil would come to an end. For example, invading other countries was an evil act. But when there were no more other countries in the world and everything belonged to the emperor, the evil act of invading would no longer exist. This was the justice of evil. Li Yunxin sighed. Yes, you are right. Between the ordinary people and the apex predators, there are two completely different systems of justice. But even the strongest person needs food, clothing, shelter, and transportation, and may be involved in the lives of the weak. When should the justice of the weak be applied, and when should the justice of the strong be applied? This is the fundamental problem. So we still need a standard, the dividing line between the two systems of justice. He paused and sighed again. I want to find this standard. He pointed at Pan-He, ninth young master, whether you eat her or not, it should be in the situation of the weak's justice. There are many people in this world and you can't eat them all. I don't like you eating people, but this is your nature and I don't want to harm you. So I suggest that the next time you want to eat someone, don't just grab them and eat them. There are so many evil people in this world, why not eat them? The ninth young master thought for a while and said, Then I still need to find out who are the evil people? Didn't you harm me again? Li Yunxin smiled. Yes. I am the one who harmed you again. But you actually tolerated this kind of harm for me? Ninth young master, this is called a friend. The new Lord Tongtown was stunned for a while and then blinked his eyes. So, friends are like this? The new Lord Tongtown was stunned for a while and then blinked his eyes. So, friends are like this? Yes, it is like this, Li Yunxin said. The ninth young master was silent for a while and then frowned. I still need to think about it. He looked at Pan He and licked his lips. Still need to think about it? Then he turned into a gust of wind, turned around and slipped out of the porthole. Li Yunxin turned to look at Pan He. The girl's eyes were full of fear and surprise. He smiled. What's there to be afraid of? I don't eat people, at least not raw people. Now tell me, why did you ask Taoist Xie to find trouble with the Shinryu? And why do you think he has the ability to find trouble with the Shinryu? Chapter 600. Pan He's lips trembled slightly for a while before she asked weakly, Are you really? Dragon. Children? Li Yunxin stared at her helplessly for a while. His body suddenly shook and suddenly expanded. Pale green and slightly golden scales appeared on his limbs and cheeks. A snow-white mane and a pair of soaring horns also appeared. In the blink of an eye, his huge body reached the top of the cabin. The narrow cabin was filled with a terrifying pressure. Pan He's eyes were wide open, and her forehead was sweating profusely. She saw Long Sun lowering his head and getting closer to her, and some mist rising from the gaps of his scales. Did you see it clearly? Pan He could only blink her eyes to indicate that she understood. She couldn't even form a sentence. This majestic and terrifying Long Sun stared at her for a while, then his body suddenly shrunk back and he became a young boy again. Pan He's eyes rolled back and she fainted. Li Yunxin snorted, raised his hand and slapped her face, and woke up the Freemasonry's new leader of the East Sea country. While watching her look of confusion that quickly turned into fear, he said coldly, People like you. Usually when talking about the dragon sons, divine dragons, the general situation of the world, emperors and nobles, you can speak with confidence and composure. You are all people who regard fame and fortune as dirt, and you won't bat an eyelid even if you were to be attacked. But once the authority in your imagination is really in front of you, your courage will be smaller than anyone else, and you will kneel faster than anyone else. If today's Freemasonry is full of people like you, I'm afraid it will be over soon. He said sternly, Speak. Why do you think that priest Xie dares to look for trouble with the Shinryu? Although the last sentence was not loud, it was full of vigor. Pan He trembled in fear and her mouth seemed to not listen to her as she blurted out, Because the elders in the association said, that person has the ability to resolve the world's calamity. With such ability, he wouldn't be afraid of the Shinryu? If he went to look for the Shinryu, the dragons might be heavily injured. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. How do you know he has such an ability? Didn't they say that person was Li Yunxin? Pan He blinked her eyes quickly. Sure enough, she told him everything she knew. Li Yunxin. That person escaped after entering Cloudy Mountain? The elders said, Then he's not that person. We just intercepted the information from Moon Enju. We know there's such a Xie Sheng. Who is the elder you're talking about? An elder of Cloud Mountain? No, it's the elders of the various sects in the past, now they're elders. She was referring to the wandering souls that possessed the heads and heads of the various sections. After being abandoned by the elders of Cloud Mountain, she became an elder again. Unfortunately, the value of this elder was too low. She knew some details but couldn't see the whole picture. That's why she felt that she could instigate Xie Sheng to look for the Shinryu. But on the other hand, he has the ability to resolve the world's calamity. This coincided with the conclusion that Li Yunxin had come to after observing and probing Xie Sheng when she met him. That Xie Sheng does have some secrets. A secret of utmost importance to Moon Enju and the Freemasons. In the past, those people thought that he had it. By now they should know. They know that he, Li Yunxin, is a fake crown prince. He had long anticipated this day. Thus, he had chosen the right side during the Battle of Cloud Mountain, binding many allies and forces for himself. Only then could he ensure his own safety. But he didn't know what those people in Moon Enju were feeling now. Li Yunxin laughed coldly. You're just a monkey in disguise. So when you find Xie Sheng, what do you plan to tell him? I'll tell him, that the Shinryu is the sky demon who came into the world. He wants to stop the calamity and kill the sky demon first. If he is really the person we are looking for, he will naturally believe it. Li Yunxin frowned. Anything else? Pan He's lips trembled violently. No, nothing else. Li Yunxin stared at her for a while. He was sure that this woman only knew this much, but his frown deepened. He knew that he was getting closer to a big secret. But the more clues and details he knew, the more confused and clueless he felt. For example, now he knew that Xie Sheng was the person the Freemasons and Mu Nanju were looking for. The reason why they were looking for him was that Xie Sheng had a secret. The new elders of the Freemasons might have heard some rumors from the elders in Cloudy Mountain, so they thought that Xie Sheng's secret could resolve the upcoming calamity. The calamity? When he met Grandpa D in Cloudy Mountain, Grandpa D said the same thing. At that time, Li Yunxin asked Grandpa D what the so-called calamity of the world was. Grandpa D told him, as if he was dealing with the natives of this world, that it was the invasion of the demonic realm. Li Yunxin hinted that he did not need to use these words to fool him. It was best to say it in words that everyone could understand. And this sentence seemed to reveal a flaw. Thus, Grandpa D quickly lost interest in him, knowing that he was not the person he was looking for. This meant that Xie Sheng knew what the so-called calamity was. But the new elders of the Freemasons and the Wandering Souls did not know, and believed that the so-called calamity was the invasion of the demonic realm. So, for the time being, looking at the problem from the perspective of the new elders, if Pan He told Xie Sheng, the savior, that the Shinryu was the sky demon who came from the demonic realm, then Xie Sheng would believe it. Xie Sheng was not a fool. Why would he believe such words naturally after hearing them? Li Yunxin thought that this could only mean one thing. The Shinryu was related to the demonic realm. In other words, the origin of the Shinryu was related to the demonic realm. As long as he knew what the demonic realm was, he would know the origin of the Shinryu. Or in other words, if Xie Sheng met the Shinryu, he would naturally get a huge amount of information. Then this step was really a wonderful coincidence. Xie Sheng mistook the Little Demon Protectorate as the organization he should go to. He also mistook the god of Shinryu as the person he was looking for, and thus went straight to Dragon Island. And when the idiots of the Freemasons saw Xie Sheng's actions, they felt that it was more evidence of the inside story that they knew. Thus, they planned to push Xie Sheng again to make him believe that the Shinryu was the Sky Demon's invasion. But they did not know that what Xie Sheng was thinking was completely different from what they were thinking. Thinking of this, Li Yunxin took a deep breath. Fortunately, he set this up in time. Just in time, he lured the Freemasons out. Otherwise, if this woman really went to meet Xie Sheng later on, with Xie Sheng's intelligence, he would have realized that something was wrong. Maybe he would have immediately turned around and returned to land. Because of this, he let out a light breath. Pacing around the narrow cabin, he stretched out his hand to push Pan He's limp wrist and said regretfully, "You were so sensible and sensible before, why did you have to suffer like this? Then tell me, where is the nest of the Freemasons now?" Pan He's face was already getting paler. When demons fought, it was not a big deal for them to get injured, bleed, or even break an arm or a leg. But for mortals, having their wrist bitten off was indeed extremely painful. She seemed to be eager to get rid of this pain. Her lips trembled as she said incoherently, In the former heavenly grotto heaven?" Li Yunxin grunted and asked, "The heavenly grotto heaven where the 36 heavenly grotto heaven and the 72 sects are located?" "Yes. There's the book you mentioned before and also oi grenades." "Yes." "Ha." Li Yunxin smiled, "Wonderful. Why didn't I think of it earlier? Brother Pheasant." Immediately, another figure emerged from the wall. Pheasant appeared beside Li Yunxin and said uneasily, "Dragon King? You're flattering me by calling me that." Li Yunxin waved his hand. "You heard it. These days, use the treasure I gave you to restrain your demon aura, and keep an eye on Xie Sheng from a distance. If anyone touches him, take him down immediately." Pheasant cupped his fists. Yes. After saying this, he didn't leave. He knew Li Yunxin's mind, so he waited for him to deal with Pan He. Li Yunxin walked a few steps beside Pan He and said, "Have you killed anyone?" Pan He seemed to know that it was a matter of life and death after all. She gritted her teeth. "No." Li Yunxin was stunned and then laughed. "No? When you attacked me just now, it didn't look like you hadn't killed anyone before." "I only hurt people, not kill people," Li Yunxin snorted. "You keep talking about the world trend but you don't dare to kill people. Your society is really doomed." After saying this, he waved his hand. Pan He immediately collapsed to the ground. She regained control of her body. However, the pain and fear made her unable to control her whole body, and she couldn't recover for a while. Take her back. Li Yunxin said to Pheasant, use the spell I taught you to erase what happened tonight from her mind. But Pheasant hesitated for a moment. Dragon King, won't you kill her? Li Yunxin turned to look at him and stared at him. Do I look like a homicidal maniac? Pheasant shrank his neck and thought for a while. He felt that the answer to this question from Li Yunxin should be yes. There were many cultivators, demons and mortals who died in his hands. But he didn't have the courage to say it, so he said, I think it's troublesome to keep her. Pan He shrank against the wall and looked at Li Yunxin with wide eyes. Dragon King, please forgive me. I won't go against you anymore and I won't get involved in these things anymore. You can't believe her words. Dragon King. Pheasant glanced at her. It's better to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Li Yunxin sighed and patted Pheasant on the shoulder. Where does such a strong murderous aura come from? We'd better win people over by virtue. Go. Seeing that Li Yunxin had made up his mind, Pheasant also sighed. He lifted Pan He up and went out by climbing over the wall. About a quarter of an hour later he came back, frowning at Li Yunxin. Dragon King, I sent her back. But, even if I erase the memory of tonight, she will still remember you. It's still a big problem. I can't figure it out. In fact, this demon was a little worried. After his Dragon King and Lu Laodao went to Qing Kingdom and came back, he changed a little. When in Li Si's yard, Pheasant was slightly aware of it, but he didn't quite understand. Tonight he finally realized what was going on. He felt that his king had become a little kind and a little soft-hearted. Even now, his Dragon King was definitely more decisive and resolute than most people. However, he was afraid that if this change continued slowly, one day it would become bad. For example, now he actually spared some manager of the Freemasonry. In the past, this kind of person could not be killed with a raise of the hand. This made the Pheasant feel very worried. Li Yunxin returned to the hammock and stretched her body. She said in a drawn-out voice, Trouble? What I want is trouble. Now we have found out the manager of the Freemasonry, but there is still the shopkeeper of Moon Anju on the ship. I don't ask you to kill her because she is bait. When we are at sea, of course we have to fish. Besides, what's the rush? Speaking of this, his tone slowly became cold. Do you know what I have been doing these days? Pheasant blinked. From Li Yunxin's tone, he felt a certain familiarity, a certain coldness hidden under the calm surface. But this coldness calmed him down and made him feel at ease. Dragon King has been telling people's fortunes these days. Humph? Li Yunxin snorted. Yes, he has been telling for a few days. What did he find out? There are more than 200 people on this ship, except for a dozen merchants. The rest of the sailors are not good people. They have killed many people and rape and theft are even more common. Just last night there were 6 groups of people discussing how to rob and burn the ship. These 6 groups don't even know each other. This time, Lu Baishui has suffered a big setback. Someone is trying to harm him. The Pheasant was a little confused. It wasn't that he didn't know who was trying to harm Lu Baishui. He just didn't know why his Dragon King spent so much effort on this person. He was just a mortal. It must be the governor who is trying to harm him. These people might also be released from prison. Otherwise, how could there be so many of them in just a few days? Speaking of this, Li Yunxin stretched himself and exhaled. But he is a hero of the Stormy Waves Road. He has traveled all over the world and has seen so much. But now he has suffered a setback because of this matter. His IQ has dropped too fast. Tell me, is this normal? Pheasant was a smart monster. But if a smart person didn't have enough experience, he would also be stupid sometimes. Therefore, when Li Yunxin said these words, his brain couldn't keep up. He didn't know what the Dragon King meant. He could only say, yes. Is this normal? Li Yunxin glanced at him and laughed. Of course it's not normal. Lu Baishui is not a fool. Of course he can see it. But even so, he still has to go to sea. Before we set sail, I talked to him for a while on the ship. I told him bluntly that he was no longer the main character on this trip. The fleet had become Xie Sheng's. And I have some enmity with Xie Sheng, and it's not a mortal enmity. Before, he was willing to take me to sea because he also wanted to go overseas and see the world. Besides, we hit it off. But that day things were completely out of control. If he went with the ship again, he would probably die. He is a hero of the martial arts world with a family and a business. He also knew that his country's governor wanted to deal with him. So he went to sea with me. Pheasant, tell me, is this normal? Pheasant could only blink. So Li Yunxin smiled again and closed his eyes. Go. I need some sleep. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.